Hello? My name's Saren, and I came home after 3 years thinking I'd surprise my father. But he wasn't behind the door waiting for me. He was curled up on the porch, shivering, locked out of the very house he built. Inside, my family was laughing, passing rolls, pouring wine, pretending nothing was wrong. They told everyone I abandoned him. But what if they were the ones who did? What if they erased me from our home, siphoned his money, rewrote the story? And what if I let it happen for too long? Would you want to know what I found when I opened that door? The bus ride into Ashburn was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. Just the low hum of the engine, the occasional cough from the older man 2 rows back, and the same Virginia pine trees I remembered as a kid flickering past the foggy window. I hadn't been back in 3 years. That town had once been the safest place I knew. It wasn't anymore. I stepped off the Greyhound with one duffel bag and a folder of documents I hadn't yet decided what to do with. My boots touched the cracked sidewalk on Maple Lane like I was stepping into a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the air smelled of chimney smoke and damp soil. Ashburn was unchanged, and yet completely different. As I walked down the block toward our old house, the red-roofed Cape Cod I grew up in, something twisted in my stomach. It was late. The sun had dipped below the trees. The kind of chilly dusk that made you walk a little faster just to get somewhere warm. When the house finally came into view, I slowed. The porch light was on. For a second, I smiled. Maybe this would go better than I thought. Maybe he left the light on for me. But then I saw the shape curled up near the steps. At first, I thought it was a bag. Or maybe a neighbor's dog. But it wasn't. It was my father. He was huddled beneath a thin, tan blanket, his head tilted against the siding like he'd been waiting, then just gave up. His coat was zipped only halfway, and I could see the white stubble on his chin, his hands trembling slightly against the cold. Clutched in one of them was a photo. I didn't even need to get closer to know what it was. It was me. That photo was taken the summer before I left. The last good summer. I was in a blue dress, holding a lemonade, smiling at something off camera. It was the kind of photo you didn't frame for display, just slipped into a book or drawer to keep close. But he had it in his hand, out here, in the cold. "Dad?" I whispered. He blinked, slow. His eyes had trouble focusing, but when they landed on me, something softened. Not joy exactly, not yet, but recognition. And that alone nearly dropped me to my knees. "Saren," he said. His voice was rough, barely there. "You came home." "I did," I said, kneeling next to him. "Why are you out here?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked toward the door behind him, the same door I used to run through after school, the one that smelled like cinnamon and floor wax. Now it was shut tight, the porch light above it buzzing faintly. I stood and knocked. No one answered. From inside, I heard music, laughter. There was a gathering going on. A family dinner, by the sound of it. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. "Who's home?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated. "Isolde, her husband. A few others, I think." And yet no one thought to check the porch, to check on him. I pulled out my phone, stared at the screen, then put it back in my coat pocket. Calling would be pointless. I didn't want a confrontation. Not tonight. "Come on," I said gently, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He nodded but said nothing. I wrapped his arm around my shoulder, guiding him down the steps slowly. His knees buckled a little, and I had to pause twice before we reached the sidewalk. The diner down the road was still open, Ashburn's only 24-hour spot. We made it there in about 15 minutes, though it felt like 50. The waitress, a woman about my age with a warm smile and a tired expression, didn't ask questions. She just showed us to a booth and brought hot coffee without us asking. Walter drank his in silence, cupping the mug like it was made of gold. "I wasn't expecting," he began, but the words got stuck somewhere in his throat. "I know," I said softly. "I didn't call ahead. I just needed to come home." The word home landed like a stone. He nodded again, but this time slower. I could see the fatigue in his eyes. Not just physical exhaustion, but something deeper. The kind of weariness that doesn't come from walking too far. It comes from being ignored too long. "You look healthy," he said after a while. "Stronger. I've had to be." He looked down at the photo again. The corners were torn, the middle slightly wrinkled. "She told me you didn't want to be part of the family anymore," he said, almost as if talking to the table. "That you moved on, that you asked not to be contacted." I didn't respond right away. What could I say? The lie had already been planted and watered for years. "She lied," I finally said. "But I guess you figured that out by now." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick with things left unsaid, but not for long. "I didn't walk away, Dad," I whispered. "I was pushed, but I'm not running anymore." He met my eyes then, and for the first time in years, I saw him, really saw him. The man who used to walk me to school when I was too scared to go alone. The one who built me a dollhouse when we couldn't afford real gifts. He was still in there. Buried, but not gone. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew this much. That house still belonged to my father, and the people inside? They'd forgotten that. But I hadn't. My father didn't say much as he dipped his spoon into the clam chowder, his hands still trembling slightly, though less now than when I found him. The steam from the bowl curled toward his face, warming the space between us in that little booth by the window. Outside, Ashburn had gone dark. A few street lamps buzzed faintly, and cars rolled by every so often, headlights flashing across the window like slow-motion lightning. I hadn't eaten much, just pushed pieces of cornbread around my plate with the dull side of a butter knife. My mind was too loud for hunger, too full of images I wasn't ready to deal with yet. He finally broke the silence. "Did you notice? The pictures? They're gone." I looked up. "Pictures?" He nodded slowly. "Yours? There's nothing of you in the house anymore." For a few seconds, I just stared at him. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I already knew. Somewhere inside, I'd felt it before he even said it, like the house had been purged of me while I was gone, erased like an old chalkboard no one bothered to rewrite on. "They took down your painting from the hallway," he continued, voice thin. "That one you did in high school, the one with the lake and the orange trees, used to say it made the place feel alive." I remembered that painting. I painted it when I was 16 and scared of being average. That piece hung in our hallway for over a decade, and now it was just gone. "What happened to it?" I asked. He stirred his soup. "She said it didn't match the new color scheme." Of course she did. I didn't have to ask who she was. Isolde always knew how to reframe something ugly into a matter of aesthetics. When she couldn't argue with emotion, she made it about style. Control cloaked in taste. "She also moved your high school metal box to the attic," he added. "Said the shelf was needed for more relevant memories." Relevant. That word stuck to the roof of my mouth like bad peanut butter. "What about the Christmas ornament I made in 3rd grade?" I asked, half joking. He smiled faintly. "Last I saw it, it was in a bag marked miscellaneous." I leaned back against the booth cushion. The waitress passed by, refilling my water with a polite nod. She must have felt the tension too. How quiet we were for two people supposedly reunited. My voice dropped. "Did she tell you I didn't want to be contacted?" He paused. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he knew it too well. "She told me you were overwhelmed," he said carefully, "that you needed space, that you moved on." I closed my eyes briefly, not to cry, but to keep the rage inside from boiling over. "I called Dad," I said, more firmly than I intended. "I sent letters, emails. After I left, I tried, for months. No one replied. My number was blocked. My letters came back with return to sender in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere." He looked at me then, and something shifted in his eyes. Not doubt, just grief, regret. "You thought I abandoned you," I said flatly. He didn't argue. "You thought I didn't care enough to come back, to call, to write." His fingers tightened around the spoon. I didn't want to believe that. But over time, it started making sense. The way she said it. Of course it did, I muttered. She said it enough times you started hearing it in your own voice. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence confirmed everything. Thanksgiving 2 years ago flashed through my mind. I'd spent it in a motel room outside Raleigh, eating gas station turkey slices and wondering if they even remembered I existed. I didn't get a single message, not even a group text. I thought maybe Dad lost his phone. Turns out he'd been told I wanted to be left alone, that I didn't care, that I was done. But I wasn't. I'd just been erased. It was a quiet kind of violence, really, not the kind that left bruises, the kind that made people vanish without ever walking away. He took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down with care. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." I nodded. I could have said a lot right then. I could have told him he should have questioned things more, that he knew me better than that. But what would that solve? So instead, I just said, "I'm here now." And that seemed to be enough, for the moment. After dinner, we walked slowly back toward the edge of town. I'd booked a small Airbnb above a local bookshop, nothing fancy, but it had heat and a clean bed. I didn't tell Isolde I was back, not yet. I had no intention of knocking on that front door, not while she was still the one deciding who got to walk through it. Outside the bookshop, before we parted ways, Dad touched my arm. "She told me you were the one who said goodbye," he said. I met his eyes. "No, I was the one who was left behind." He didn't answer. Again, he didn't have to. I watched him walk back down the sidewalk, his pace slow but steady. The old Walter was still in there, tired, worn, but still walking on his own. Back in the room, I dropped my bag and stood by the window for a while, watching the lights flicker across Main Street. A teenage couple walked by laughing, their voices bouncing down the block. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I opened my folder and stared at the documents I'd been carrying for weeks. Legal notes, letters, printouts. I hadn't known what I was going to do with them, until now. Isolde had taken me out of the frame, but she didn't get to keep the whole picture. She could play the perfect daughter all she wanted. She could host her church brunches and talk about caretaking like it was some holy burden she'd chosen to bear. But I knew what she was really doing. And soon, so would everyone else. I didn't leave them. But now I was ready to walk back in. And this time, I wouldn't knock. I didn't sleep much that night. After walking my father back to the small apartment Isolde had arranged for him after downsizing, I returned to the room I'd rented above the bookshop and laid awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. Every breath I took felt heavy, as if the truth I'd barely started uncovering had weight of its own. By the time the first light of day crept through the window blinds, I had already showered, dressed, and poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the old percolator on the counter. I didn't bother trying to look well-rested. No one in that house would care. The sun was slow to rise over Ashburn, filtered through the thin mist that clung to the sidewalks like a secret no one wanted to talk about. I took the long way to the house, walking through side streets I used to know by heart. The playground near Maple Avenue was empty, the swings still. The church marquee read, "Family is where the heart is." It felt like a joke now. When I reached our street, the air sharpened. The Bramhall home stood exactly as I remembered it, yet it felt like walking into a stage set built to impersonate a life I no longer belonged to. The red shutters, the porch steps, even the hedges trimmed a little too perfectly. It all looked like home on the outside. But what was inside had changed. I didn't knock. I had no plans to knock. I turned the knob and walked in like I still had a right to. The house smelled different, cleaner, colder, like lemon disinfectant and vanilla candles, trying too hard to pretend everything was fine. The living room had been redecorated with lighter tones, beige pillows, cream throws. The wall where our family photo gallery used to be was now taken over by a massive wooden plaque that read, "Family is who shows up." I stopped in front of it, stared, took a slow breath. It wasn't just a new decoration, it was a declaration. My pictures were gone. No graduation photo. No softball team photo from 8th grade. Not even the blurry one of me on my 10th birthday blowing out candles. Gone. Like I never existed. In their place, I saw Isolde and her husband Dorian at fundraisers, posed beside community leaders and city officials. A photo of her receiving a plaque that read, Ashburn's Caregiver of the Year. I stood there in silence, my heartbeat slow, steady, but hot in my chest. That's when I heard the quiet creak of a door. I turned toward the kitchen hallway, half expecting Isolde to appear. But it was empty. Whoever had been watching me had disappeared behind a closed door. I walked toward the front entrance to leave. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like lemon spray and lies. As I reached for the handle, I heard a voice call softly from the other side of the fence. Seren? I turned and saw Mildred Koenig, our neighbor from across the street. She looked the same as ever, sensible coat, short gray curls, the same sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mildred, I said, forcing a smile. She stepped closer to the gate, hesitating before she spoke. I didn't know you were back. Neither did anyone else, I said quietly. I didn't exactly send a postcard. She studied me for a moment, her face softening. I was going to the mailbox and, well, I have something. I think it belongs to you. I met her halfway across the lawn. Her gloved hands fumbled in her coat pocket before pulling out a small, slightly crumpled envelope. My name was written in my father's handwriting, familiar and uneven. The ink faded. He gave it to me 3 years ago, she said gently. Asked me to mail it. I forgot. And when things got complicated, I didn't know if it would help or hurt. I stared at the envelope. 3 years. It had been here the entire time. Why now? I asked, not accusing, just tired. Because you deserve to read it, she said. And because I should have done the right thing sooner. I thanked her and tucked the letter into my coat. She left with a nod, quiet and purposeful, disappearing behind her own door. I stood on the porch for a few more moments before sitting on the steps and opening the envelope. The paper inside was thin, lined. My father's pen strokes were shaky, but legible. Seren, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get the timing right. But I want you to know, I didn't stop loving you. I still see you in every sunrise. Don't believe the silence. It was never yours. I read it twice. 3 times. I had never cried for being forgotten. But now, I cried for being remembered. Folding the letter back carefully, I tucked it into my bag. I had barely stood up when I heard Mildred again. She'd come back out, walking across the lawn with more purpose this time. There's something else, she said, quieter now. About your calls. I met her eyes, feeling my throat tighten again. She glanced around, even though no one was near. Isolde told us you didn't want to be contacted, that you'd asked to be left alone, that you'd moved on with your life. She told you that? She told everyone. I took a breath, steadying the sting that rose inside me. She had your father's phone, Mildred continued, after you left. She said it confused him, that it was better if she handled things. I nodded slowly, anger simmering now. Not the kind that exploded, but the kind that grew roots. It wasn't just that she lied. It was how easily people believed her. You always called on his birthday, Mildred added. Every year, right around the same time, he'd wait, every year, then stop asking, said he didn't want to bother you. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to keep steady. She rewrote everything, I murmured, and no one asked questions. She made it sound believable, Mildred said softly. She's good at that. She always was. A long pause followed. Then Mildred looked toward the house behind me and said something I wasn't expecting. I think she's scared of you being back. I gave a small, humorless smile. She should be. As Mildred returned home, I stood there in the yard, looking at the house I used to run into after school, covered in mud and excitement. Now, it was the scene of something far colder, and when I turned toward the front window, I saw her. Isolde, standing just behind the curtains, watching. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been expecting this moment and wasn't concerned. Not yet. The curtains dropped the second our eyes met, as if they hadn't been pulled back intentionally in the first place. I didn't move, not right away. The porch was damp, the air heavier than before, and a quiet tension settled in my chest like dust in an untouched room. I waited a moment longer, listening for movement inside. Nothing. Just the soft ticking of wind chimes someone had hung near the entryway. New ones, not the rusted set Dad and I used to fix every spring. The door was unlocked this time. She wasn't home. I knew that already. Mildred had mentioned earlier in the morning, in that careful way of hers, that Isolde had a brunch scheduled at the church. Fundraising, she'd said. Something about a new wing for the retirement ministry. I figured it would give me an hour, maybe two. Long enough to find out what I needed to know, long enough to see what they'd tried so hard to keep buried. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The house smelled like artificial lavender and wood polish. Everything was in its place, too perfect. It wasn't how I remembered it. It wasn't how he would have kept it. Not Walter Bramhall, not the man who left books stacked on the floor, receipts stuck to the fridge with old magnets, and his glasses in the laundry room for no good reason. I walked slowly, running my hand along the hallway walls, past the vacant spot where my painting used to hang. The silence inside was thicker than outside, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I turned left into the study. It still had the same worn oak desk and shelves packed with paperbacks, but the clutter was gone. Clean surfaces, labeled folders, matching binders. None of it looked like Dad. It looked like a hotel disguised as a memory. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one we used to toss unpaid bills and random keys into, and found only manila envelopes now, each neatly marked. The third one down caught my eye. Utilities property. Utilities, my foot. I opened it and pulled out a packet held together by a binder clip. The first page was a copy of the deed to the house. I scanned it, my fingers tightening as I reached the signature line. Dad's name was there, Walter Bramhall. But the handwriting was off. It was jagged, uncertain, like someone had guided his hand, or worse, signed it for him in a rush. His usual signature had rhythm, even in his older years. This? It looked forced, unnatural. I flipped through the pages, noting the date, 1.5 years ago. Right around the time I stopped receiving forwarded mail. Right around the time Mildred said he stopped talking much. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every page. The deeper I went, the more I found. Documents that shouldn't have been there, things I wasn't supposed to see, printouts from a bank I didn't recognize. One statement listed the account holder as Walter Bramhall, but the mailing address, Isolde and Dorian's condo in Richmond, monthly deposits from elder care grants and assistance funds, and regular ATM withdrawals, thousands. I didn't even realize my jaw had clenched until I felt it in my temples. My father had never needed financial assistance like that, not back then. He had retirement savings, a pension from teaching, and the house had been paid off since I was in college. And now somehow, a separate account existed, money moving through it like it belonged to someone else entirely. I stood still for a moment, listening. Still no one home. I walked into the kitchen, where the mail sat in a wicker tray by the fridge. Sorting through it, I found nothing of interest. Grocery ads, charity mailers, a flyer for a lawn care company. But the name on each envelope read, Current Resident, or Isolde Crane. Not one addressed to Walter. I was about to head back to the study when the front door creaked open. My stomach tensed. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No footsteps on the porch. Then his voice, calm, casual, but cold enough to freeze the air around me. Looking for something? I turned slowly. Dorian Blake stood in the doorway, keys in hand, eyebrows raised like he'd just walked in on someone stealing his Sunday paper. He looked the same as always, pressed shirt, neatly trimmed beard, wedding ring that caught the light a little too well. He had the face of a man people trusted too easily, charming enough for church, sharp enough for boardrooms, and empty enough to lie without blinking. "Didn't expect you," I said evenly. "Clearly," he replied, eyes scanning the documents on the counter. "Isolde's not home." "I know." He stepped farther into the room, closing the door behind him. "So what brings you back to this particular corner of the world?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the deed and held it up toward him. Did he even know he signed this? His expression didn't change. Not one muscle in his face twitched. That's a legal document, he said, walking slowly toward the kitchen island. Signed and notarized. Everything's above board. His name's on it, sure, I said. But that's not his handwriting, at least not the one he used for most of his life. I know the difference. Well, maybe you're just remembering it wrong. I met his gaze, unmoved. I remember it better than you think. He smiled then, the kind that made you want to lock up your valuables. Careful, Seren. You're starting to sound like someone looking for a problem. And you're starting to sound like someone who's hiding one. A pause stretched between us. Finally, he leaned in slightly and said, You should tread lightly. You've only just come back. Stirring up trouble so soon? Doesn't reflect well on your track record. Is that a threat? No, he said smoothly. Just an observation. People talk. People remember. I stepped around the island and gathered the pages into my bag. I'm not here to make a scene, I said calmly. But if something was done to my father without his understanding or consent, I'll find out. You and I both know he's not in the state he used to be. Dorian's jaw flexed, but his tone didn't change. Walter agreed to everything. He needed help. We stepped in. That's what families do. No, I said, turning toward the door. What families do is protect each other, not profit off them. As I pulled the door open, he added, You might want to be careful who you accuse. Wouldn't want another misunderstanding like last time. My spine stiffened, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped outside into the thick afternoon air, letting the door close behind me. The storm clouds above were moving in slowly, but steadily. The storm didn't start outside. It started right there, in that room. After I left the house that afternoon, the clouds followed me. Not the kind that carried thunder, at least, not yet, but the kind that made you pull your coat tighter and keep your thoughts closer. I didn't go back to the room above the bookshop, not right away. I needed to clear my head first. I drove the half-mile stretch out to the small park by the water tower, the one Dad used to take me to when I was little. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching a pair of teens throwing a football near the tree line. I envied their freedom, how they could move without thought, yell without fear of judgment. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without a storm in my chest. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the sky had darkened for real, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the silence, the kind that feels planned. The fire was going in the living room, a showpiece of warmth, but the air around it was cold. Fabricated. Like everything else in that house lately. Dad sat on the recliner, shoulders slumped, eyes flicking from the muted television to the window and back again. He looked smaller somehow, dimmed. Did you eat? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I think so. I crossed the room and stepped into the kitchen. The dinner plates were still in the dishwasher, unwashed. The countertop was spotless, too spotless. I opened the fridge. No signs of leftovers, not even a bowl of soup or a sandwich wrapped in foil. There were 2 boxes of frozen meals on the bottom shelf, both untouched. I moved to the pantry and found a small pill organizer resting on top of a cereal box. I opened it. Wednesday and Thursday were still full. It was Saturday night. I took a long breath and walked back into the living room, holding the organizer in my hand. Dad, I said gently, have you been taking these? He looked at the container and blinked. That's Isolde's job. She hasn't given them to you in at least 2 days. He frowned but said nothing. He hasn't eaten since yesterday, has he? I asked. Isolde's voice cut in from the hallway before he could speak. He forgets, she said. I can't force him. I turned to face her. She stood with one arm resting against the doorframe, holding a glass of wine like we were chatting about the weather. She looked calm, polished, like someone who believed in her performance. Then maybe he shouldn't be left to remember on his own, I said, keeping my tone steady. He gets confused, she replied, sipping. If I press him, he gets upset, so I let him decide. You let him decide whether to take heart medication? She rolled her eyes. You've been back 2 minutes and already acting like you know everything. I held up the pill organizer. I know this is unacceptable. She gave a clipped smile. You always were dramatic, Seren. Everything's a crisis with you. I didn't respond. I walked over and placed the organizer on the coffee table, right in front of Dad. I'll remind you every morning from now on, I told him. Don't rely on anyone else. Isolde scoffed. You don't live here. Maybe I should. She didn't like that. The next morning, I kept quiet. Observed, watched the routine. Isolde spent an hour preparing for her church appearance, curling her hair, adjusting the brooch on her coat, spritzing perfume into the air like a fog of false benevolence. Dorian left early for a business breakfast. That left Dad and me. I made him eggs and toast. Not fancy, but warm. Real. He ate quietly, carefully. I handed him his morning meds, one by one. He hesitated, but took them. At noon, I checked Isolde's Facebook page. The top post was a photo, her feeding Dad in the living room, the same room he'd been sitting in just 20 minutes earlier. Alone. Caption: Taking care of Dad is a blessing, not always easy, but worth every moment. 57 likes, 20 comments, all from women in her prayer circle. You're an angel, Isolde. He's lucky to have you. True caregiver spirit. You inspire me. I turned off my phone and stared out the window. Dad sat on the porch now, a blanket over his lap, staring at nothing. No one else noticed. By evening, I had enough. She was in the kitchen arranging snacks on a ceramic tray like she was hosting a magazine shoot. I walked in, leaned on the counter, and said plainly, "If this keeps up, I'll get the law involved." She didn't flinch, didn't pause. Legal action? From you? Her smile was practiced, slow. Please, Seren, don't be ridiculous. I'm serious. She took a grape from the tray, popped it in her mouth. You've been gone 3 years. You think people are just going to take your word over mine? Dorian entered then, setting his keys on the table, eyeing us both. What's this? He asked casually. She's threatening us, Isolde said with a light laugh. Apparently, she doesn't like the way I've been handling Dad's care. Dorian chuckled. Seren, come on. You've barely been back. It's not a good look to come home swinging. I kept my tone even. If you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be worried. He walked toward the fridge, opened it, pulled out a soda. You're stirring up trouble where there isn't any. Again. I'm protecting my father. From who? His own daughter? Dorian snapped back. You always think everyone's out to get you. No, I said softly. Just the ones who are. We stood there in silence, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Isolde finally spoke, her voice lowered. You're not going to win this, Seren. You've got no one in this town. No one's going to believe you. I didn't answer. I walked past her, past Dorian, back into the living room. Dad looked up from his recliner with that same tired confusion. I smiled at him. Want to go for a drive tomorrow morning? Just you and me. He nodded. Okay. Isolde called after me. You don't get to rewrite history just because you regret leaving. I stopped in the hallway. No. But I do get to stop you from rewriting his. That night, I didn't sleep much. Again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, counting reasons. The next morning before breakfast, I made a call. Her name was Marla Eames, an attorney, independent, clean track record, experienced in elder care disputes and financial abuse cases. She answered on the third ring. Marla Eames speaking. I didn't hesitate. Hi, I'm Serene Althea. I need help protecting my father. The next morning started with drizzle, thin, cold, and insistent. It clung to the windshield of my car as I pulled into the narrow parking lot behind Marla Eames's office. A low, gray sky stretched across Ashburn like an unfinished thought, and I could feel the pressure in my temples from the sleepless night I'd spent staring at the ceiling, making lists in my head. When I stepped into the law office, the scent of cedar and something faintly citrus hit me. Clean, intentional. The space was small but focused, with thick legal books lining the walls and a single framed quote near the receptionist's desk. Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. That hit a little too close. Marla stepped out within a minute of my arrival. She was mid-40s, hair pulled into a low knot, no makeup, but sharp eyes that had the weight of someone who'd seen plenty and wasn't easily impressed. "You must be Seren," she said, extending a hand. "Come on back." I followed her into a private room with a glass-topped table and 2 chairs. No distractions, no fluff. I liked that. As I sat, she clicked her pen, poised and ready. "Tell me everything." I did. For the next 20 minutes, I walked her through every beat of the past few days, finding my father on the porch, the erased family photos, the fake signature on the deed, the pill organizer collecting dust, the staged caregiving photos, the blocked communication, the bank statements, the whispers from Mildred, and the sick feeling growing in my gut. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, just scribbled notes and nodded when necessary. When I was done, she leaned back slightly and tapped the end of her pen against the table. "You may not be the heir on paper right now," she said carefully, "but legally, you have a window, if we move fast." I opened my bag and slid over the copies I had made, the notarized deed, the bank statement, a photo of the pillbox still full on a Saturday. She looked through them silently, flipping page after page. "This isn't just moral failure," she finally said. "This could be elder abuse, and criminal." Her words didn't shake me, they grounded me. Like finally hearing someone say out loud what I'd been screaming internally. "What happens next?" I asked. "We need documentation, more of it, witnesses, a medical evaluation if possible, and a declaration from your father." "That's going to be hard," I admitted. "He's lucid, but he's hesitant. He still loves her, in his own way." Marla nodded. "That's common. People mistake loyalty for protection. But love doesn't mean silence." I left her office an hour later with a checklist, a tentative plan, and the rarest of things in this mess: clarity. Driving back to the house, the rain had slowed, but the clouds hadn't lifted. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Dorian's car was gone. Probably at his office or working one of his weekend consulting gigs he liked to boast about on social media. Isolde's sedan was still parked under the carport. She must have returned from church. I stepped inside without announcement. The house was too quiet again. I walked through the kitchen, nothing out of place. Into the hallway, no sound. But the moment I turned the corner into the laundry room, something stopped me cold. There, on the floor, near the edge of the utility sink, was the scarf I had knitted for Dad the winter before I left. It was navy blue, wool blend, with a pattern that took me 3 tries to get right. He used to wear it even on days it wasn't that cold, just because it was from me. I'd seen it last week, neatly folded in the hall closet. But now, it was soaked. Mud-caked. Dumped in a pile beside a cleaning rag and what looked like a used mop head. My throat tightened. I bent down slowly, picked it up, and held it in my hands. The weight of it felt heavier now, not because of the water, but because of what it meant. I didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. It was obvious. They'd used it. Used something I made for my father to clean the floor, or worse, the bathroom. And then tossed it aside like garbage. No one said anything about it. No one apologized. Not that I expected them to. I wrung it out in the sink, then washed it carefully with dish soap, rinsing until the water ran clear. I laid it across the back of a kitchen chair to dry and didn't speak a word the rest of the day. That night, the house was dark early. Dorian came in late, Isolde was in her room, and Dad had gone to bed around 7. Before I turned in, I walked into his room, quiet, careful, and placed the folded scarf on his pillow. He didn't stir. Then I went to the office. I opened my laptop and printed a single-page letter, formal, calm, signed by Marla and myself. A notice of legal intent, not a threat, a promise. I walked to Isolde's room. Her door was slightly ajar, light still on. I pushed the paper under her door. The sound it made was almost nothing, but I knew she'd hear it. They ignored my warning, and now I wasn't just knocking. I was walking through the front door with the law behind me. By the time Sunday rolled in, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way most people expect anger to look. I wasn't pacing or shouting. I wasn't tossing accusations around like darts. No, I was still focused, ready. They thought I'd flinch. But when I stepped onto the porch that morning, dressed in the same navy blazer I used to wear to client meetings back in Raleigh, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the house like I belonged there, because I did. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls hit me first. Isolde always did know how to curate an experience. She had music playing, some soft instrumental hymn, and fresh flowers arranged on the sideboard. Everything was polished, just like her. People were already gathered in the living room, holding styrofoam cups of coffee and small plates with carefully arranged fruit. I recognized a few of them, ladies from the church, a couple of retired school teachers, even someone from the mayor's office. Walter was there too, tucked into the far corner of the room like a piece of furniture no one really wanted but couldn't throw away. He looked out of place, wearing a cardigan that was 2 sizes too big and socks that didn't match. Isolde floated between guests like she was hosting a segment on public access television. Every smile was a campaign, every gesture rehearsed. She saw me the moment I stepped through the door, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face, but it was gone before it could settle. "Seren," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I didn't know you'd be joining us." I smiled politely. "Guess I forgot to RSVP." A few heads turned. A few mouths paused mid-chew. I watched as Dorian made his way toward me, mimosa in hand, confidence radiating off him like heat off blacktop. "Well, this is a surprise," he said. "You look prepared." "I tend to come that way," I replied, my eyes scanning the room. Isolde linked her arm through his, all performance. "We're just so glad you're here. We were worried you'd be too busy with your new life to remember little Ashburn." I gave her nothing in return. Just silence, the kind that makes people uneasy. Walter's eyes met mine briefly from across the room. He looked unsure, maybe even nervous. I nodded at him gently. I needed him to know that this wasn't about him, not directly. This was about truth, justice, finally cracking the surface. The room buzzed with small talk and clinking forks for another 10 minutes before it happened. Dorian, now 2 drinks in and a little looser in the shoulders, chuckled too loudly as he leaned over to a man near the fireplace. "She's only back 'cause she smells money," he said. "Isn't that what your sister said?" The laughter died instantly. My smile returned. I turned slowly toward the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, I'm back, but not for money, for truth." The room held its breath. I could feel the shift, the sudden collective realization that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be another cozy Sunday brunch. A few people set down their drinks. One woman crossed her arms. Another looked at Isolde with an eyebrow raised. Marla stepped through the door just then, quiet as a shadow. She wasn't dressed for brunch. Gray slacks, simple blouse, no makeup. She carried a laptop bag over her shoulder and a portable projector in her hand. "Sorry I'm late," she said to me. I nodded. "Right on time." Isolde's eyes narrowed. "What's going on?" I ignored her. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the room, "thank you for coming. Since we have an audience, I thought this would be the perfect moment to share a little something." Marla placed the projector on the edge of the console table. The room dimmed slightly as she powered it on. She connected the laptop, cued the video, and gave me a subtle nod. "This," I said, "is footage from my father's living room, recorded on the day he signed over the deed to this home." Dorian took a step forward. "Now hold on." "Don't worry," I said, "you're in it." The video began to play. The image was slightly grainy, but clear enough. Walter sat in his chair, looking unsure, his hands trembling. "Do I have to sign?" his voice asked, shaky, barely audible. Then another voice, Dorian's, cut in, unmistakable. "Just do it, or you won't see her again." Gasps. One woman covered her mouth. A man muttered, "Is that legal?" Isolde tried to speak. "That's been taken out of context." But the room was already turning. Dorian's bravado evaporated. He stammered, This is an invasion of privacy." "No," Marla replied calmly. "This is evidence. Admissible. And already submitted. Isolde's face had gone pale. Her carefully crafted facade was cracking, hairline fractures running fast. I took a breath, not to calm myself, but to land the final blow with precision. This home was built by my father. He paid for it, protected it, raised us in it. He opened his door to people who now lock him out of his own life, and he will not be stolen from, not by blood, not by marriage. Silence. The church deacon stepped forward. I think we should go. He walked out. Others followed. No one looked back. Isolde stood frozen, one hand still resting on the mimosa tray. Dorian's expression was blank, like he hadn't yet accepted what just happened. I turned toward them one last time. You buried me in silence. I just gave you an audience. After the last guest left the brunch in stunned silence and the front door closed behind them with a dull click, I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and let my hands shake for a full minute before setting it down. I wasn't shaking from nerves, not anymore. Those had burned off hours ago. It was the aftershock, the kind your body gives you when your mind's already bracing for the next blow. We didn't speak the rest of that day. Dorian stayed in the den, nursing whatever pride he still had, and Isolde disappeared into her room, the sound of her heels echoing like a threat against the hardwood floor. Dad went to bed early, asking for 2 Tylenol and nothing more. I gave them to him, kissed his forehead, and told him I'd see him in the morning, but we both knew something irreversible had shifted. Tuesday came fast. We arrived at the courthouse just after 8 a.m. The air outside was cold enough to sting your fingers. I helped Dad out of the car. He insisted on wearing his old navy blazer, the one with the fraying cuffs and a pen mark on the inside pocket. Said it was the only one that still felt like his. I didn't argue. Marla met us at the entrance with a nod and a black folder clutched under one arm. She looked exactly how I needed her to look. Steady, unbothered, all business. No pearls, no performance. Inside, the Ashburn County Courthouse was quieter than I expected. Not many people. A few reporters, some older folks from the neighborhood who probably heard about the brunch incident, and 1 or 2 of Isolde's church friends who looked like they regretted coming the second they sat down. Isolde and Dorian were already seated. She wore a cream-colored dress suit and that fake humility smile she reserved for judges and funerals. Dorian looked uncomfortable. He tugged at his tie twice before the judge even entered the room. The gavel didn't slam. The judge simply cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Let's begin." Marla stood. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Walter Bramhall was misled into signing over legal rights to his property under coercion and without full understanding of the consequences. Furthermore, we believe financial misconduct was committed under the guise of elder care, and we have documentation, testimony, and audio-visual evidence to support that." The judge nodded slowly. "Continue." First came the documents, the signed deed with Walter's shaky handwriting, the bank statements showing monthly withdrawals that had nothing to do with medical expenses or home care, and the pill logs I'd kept for the past week, showing gaps and inconsistencies. Then came Dr. Merrow's statement, pre-recorded due to scheduling conflict. She explained that Walter had been experiencing mild cognitive decline, but was still capable of basic decision-making, if properly informed. She had never been consulted about legal decisions, not once. And then the video played, the same one we had shown at brunch, but this time with clearer audio and Marla's annotations. Walter's voice, confused and pleading, Dorian's, sharp and commanding. "Just do it, or you won't see her again." When it ended, the room didn't make a sound. The judge turned to Walter. "Mr. Bramhall, do you understand why we're here today?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you feel you were pressured into signing those documents?" He blinked. "I thought if I didn't, I'd lose what little family I had left." That did it. The judge looked down at her papers, then back at the courtroom. "This court does not take kindly to coercion disguised as caregiving. It appears that not only were Mr. Bramhall's rights violated, but that certain parties used their proximity to him for personal financial gain. Therefore, I hereby order the reversal of the property transfer. Walter Bramhall's rights to the home are reinstated, and he may appoint a co-caretaker of his choosing." She paused. Do you have someone in mind? Dad looked over at me. Seren, he said without hesitation. Always her. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. The judge continued. Furthermore, this court is referring Mr. Dorian Blake to the Office of Financial Crimes Investigation for misuse of elder care funds. Ms. Isolde Crane is hereby stripped of legal authority over her father's affairs, effective immediately. There was no gavel, no dramatic exit, just quiet paperwork being shuffled and the rising of bodies from chairs as people filed out one by one. Isolde didn't look at me. Not once. Dorian muttered something under his breath, but Marla raised an eyebrow, and he thought better of repeating it. We drove home in silence, Walter resting peacefully in the passenger seat. That evening, as the last light of day fell across the front yard, I heard the front door open and close softly. I was in the hallway when I saw her, Isolde, standing near the foyer, arms crossed, waiting. I just came to get my things, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I didn't argue. They're already packed. She hesitated. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I walked past her, opened a drawer, and pulled out a frame. It was the photo she had taken down, the one of Dad and me at the lake, the year before I left. We were smiling, his arm around me, my face pressed into his shoulder. I handed it to her. You don't live here anymore, I said evenly. Neither does your version of this family. She took it with trembling fingers, but didn't say anything else. She left 5 minutes later, her footsteps quieter than I expected. We didn't slam the door behind her. We just never opened it again. The days after Isolde left the house passed slowly, not because we were grieving her absence, but because we were finally learning how to live without the weight of her presence. I didn't expect peace to arrive like a parade. It didn't come with celebration or balloons. It came quietly, through the hum of the old heater kicking on in the mornings, the sound of Walter's slippers across the kitchen tile, and the smell of coffee that filled the hallway before either of us said a word. 3 weeks had gone by since the court hearing. Ashburn had started to dress itself for winter. The first snow came the day after Thanksgiving, just a soft dusting that melted by noon, but it was enough to remind us of the season we were entering and the ones we had survived. I repainted the front door myself, the same cherry red Dad used to touch up every few years, now dulled from neglect. It felt right to restore it with my own hands. The porch light stayed on every evening, and this time, not as a symbol of waiting for someone who would never return, but as a promise that no one would be left outside again. Every morning, I'd brew coffee before the sun fully lifted over the pine trees behind the house. Dad would sit on the porch with a wool blanket over his knees, the steam from his cup curling into the air as he quietly read a book or just stared into the yard like he was memorizing the piece. We didn't talk about Isolde. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was shared. It was on a Tuesday, while reorganizing the hallway closet, that I found the notebook. It was tucked behind a stack of old tax returns and some yellowing church bulletins wedged between a photo album and a dusty copy of A Tale of Two Cities that still had my high school notes in the margins. I recognized the leather cover immediately, scuffed on the corners, the binding slightly torn. Dad had used that notebook for years, grocery lists, phone numbers, sermon quotes, passing thoughts. I sat on the hallway floor, cross-legged, and began to flip through. Pages and pages of familiar scrawl, scribbled reminders, ideas he never got around to, names of people I hadn't heard of in years. It was near the back, though, that I found the entry that stopped me cold. It wasn't dated, but I knew it had been written sometime after I left Ashburn, when the distance between us had widened into something neither of us could navigate alone. If you're reading this, I probably didn't get the timing right, but it was always meant for Seren, the house, the story, the chance to be heard. I read it twice, then a third time. He had never forgotten me, not once, even when his memory faltered, even when my name wasn't spoken aloud in that house anymore. Somewhere deep down, he had still known, still hoped, that I'd come back, and that when I did, I'd need to know the truth had never belonged to Isolde. It belonged to him, to us. I took the notebook into the living room and placed it on the mantel, right beside the restored family photo of me and Dad at the lake, now sitting in the spot where Isolde's award once stood. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Dad still had his moments, forgetting which cabinet held the coffee mugs, asking if it was Saturday when it was Wednesday, but he smiled more. He asked questions again. He started singing to himself while shaving, soft renditions of old gospel hymns he used to hum on road trips. Mildred came by every Sunday with banana bread wrapped in wax paper, tied with twine. She never stayed long, just enough to say hello and ask if we needed anything. I think the visit was more for her than for us. A quiet reconciliation. An acknowledgement that maybe she should have asked more questions or believed fewer answers. One morning, I found a letter tucked beneath the welcome mat. It was from Pastor Monroe. Seren, I owe you an apology, one I should have given long before now. I let appearances convince me that truth was inconvenient. You reminded us that protecting the vulnerable is never optional. Thank you. Caleb Monroe. I folded the note and placed it inside the notebook with Dad's entry. Some truths deserve to be kept together. We didn't host a Christmas party that year. No tree went up, no wreath on the door. But we did hang string lights across the porch railing, and Dad insisted on putting the old rocking chairs back out, weathered and creaky but still sturdy. Every evening, we'd sit for a while, 2 mugs of cider in hand, and watch the snow begin to dust the neighborhood like powdered sugar. On New Year's Eve, I found myself writing in the same journal I used in Raleigh. The one I packed when I left that life behind. I hadn't written anything in months, not since before I returned to Ashburn, but that night, the words came like water through a cracked dam. I didn't come back to win. I came back to remind him and myself that I was still his daughter. And I still am. It wasn't a happy ending. Happy endings are for fairy tales and greeting cards. This was something better. This was true. And this time, when he sat on the porch, the door stayed open, and the light stayed on. Some families break your heart quietly, through silence, through control, through the stories they erase behind closed doors. But sometimes, healing starts when one person decides to stop being quiet. What would you do if the people you trusted most rewrote your life without asking? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. More real-life inspired stories about truth, justice, and quiet revenge are coming your way. Let's talk in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their voice. Hey there, I'm Celine. And let me tell you, there's nothing more painful than realizing your own family never saw you as their equal. For years, I gave everything to them, paid their bills, covered their debts, and made sure everyone was taken care of. I thought that's what family was about. But then, I found out the truth. My father had created a trust fund, just for my sister, $1 million safety net, hidden away while I was left to struggle. While I was led to believe we had nothing, and when I finally confronted them, they expected me to keep paying. The house? Mine to cover. My sister's lifestyle? Still my problem, but when I said no, that's when the real war started. They froze my accounts, tried to sue me, lied to the rest of the family to turn them against me. And the worst part, I never saw it coming. I thought I was part of this family, but I was just their personal ATM. So, what would you do? Would you keep paying? Would you walk away? Because let me tell you, the moment I stopped, everything changed. And if you want to hear just how far they went to keep me under their control, you're gonna want to hear the rest of this story. The moment I pulled up to the Draven family's vacation home in Lake Michigan, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The house itself hadn't changed, large bay windows reflecting the soft glow of the evening sky, the smell of pine and lake water filling the crisp air. It should have felt familiar, comforting even. But lately, these family gatherings had lost their warmth. I stepped inside, greeted by the scent of rosemary and garlic from my mother's cooking. Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter, stirring a pot with slow, measured movements. She glanced up and gave me a small, tight smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. In the dining room, my father, Cormac, was already seated at the head of the long wooden table. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, the kind of stance that silently demanded authority. Vesper sat across from him, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I took my usual seat, and for a moment, the clinking of silverware and the occasional murmur of conversation created an illusion of normalcy. But beneath it, I could feel it, the tension lurking just beneath the surface. Cormac set his fork down and folded his hands together. "Celine," he said, his voice even but carrying the weight of unspoken expectation. "You know property taxes are coming up, right?" The shift in tone was immediate. I knew where this was going. "Yes, I know," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Why?" He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the table toward me. "You always take care of this, don't you?" I stared at the envelope, but didn't touch it. There it was. Not a request, not a discussion, just the expectation that I would handle it like I always had. Something inside me clenched. The words echoed in my mind. I always take care of this. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, one I had never truly questioned until now. Vesper let out a sigh, finally looking up from her phone. "It's just taxes, Celine," she said with a casual shrug. "You have more money than you need." I turned to her, my patience thinning. "I've already paid over $100,000 in family expenses. Why can't someone else step up for once?" Vesper blinked, then frowned. "Dad has the money, obviously," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "My trust fund's been set up for years." Silence crashed over the room like a wave. A slow, creeping sensation crawled up my spine. A trust fund? I turned my gaze to Cormac. His expression darkened instantly. "That's enough, Vesper," he snapped. But it was already too late. My mind raced. My father had always told me that finances were tight, that we had to be mindful of spending. But if there was enough money for a trust fund, one substantial enough for my sister to casually bring it up, then why had I been led to believe otherwise? Dinner continued, but I barely tasted my food. My thoughts were elsewhere, pieces clicking together in a way I didn't like. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself pacing the hallway. I wasn't the kind of person to go digging, but something about Vesper's words wouldn't leave me alone. I walked past my father's office. The door was slightly ajar. A small voice in my head told me to keep walking. I didn't. The room was neat, controlled, just like him. My eyes scanned the shelves, the desk, the small safe tucked in the corner. I knew where he kept the key. Hands shaking slightly, I reached into the drawer and found it. The safe clicked open. Inside was a stack of documents, but my eyes landed on one immediately. A thick folder with a name stamped on the front in bold letters. Vesper Draven, Trust Fund. I flipped it open, scanning numbers that made my breath catch in my throat. $1.2 million. I gripped the paper tightly, my pulse roaring in my ears. All these years, I had been paying for everything. Taxes, repairs, family vacations, even Vesper's car payments. And all along, my father had been securing my sister's future behind my back. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at the truth in black and white. By the time I returned to my room, my decision was made. The next morning, I stormed into the dining room, the folder clenched in my hand. Cormac looked up from his coffee, barely blinking as I dropped the papers onto the table. "Explain this," I demanded. He didn't even glance down. Instead, he exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. "You had no right to go through my things," he said. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "I had every right after years of being manipulated," I shot back. "You've been lying to me, using me." His gaze hardened. "You're successful, Celine. Vesper needs more help." I had expected some excuse, some justification, but the sheer coldness of his logic stunned me into silence. And that's when I knew. Nothing I said would change his mind. I set my jaw, lifting my chin. "I'm done paying," I said quietly, but firmly. For anything. Cormac's expression didn't change, but the shift in his demeanor told me one thing. I had just declared war. Vesper sat up straighter, finally sensing that something irreversible had just happened. Silence stretched between us, thick and unrelenting. My father's face remained eerily composed, the picture of control. He wasn't shocked, wasn't apologetic. If anything, there was a quiet calculation behind his eyes. He was already deciding how to handle me. "You're overreacting, Celine," he said, his voice level, as if I had just complained about a misplaced dinner order, rather than years of lies. I let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Overreacting? My fingers curled around the document I had slammed onto the table minutes before. You made me believe we were struggling. You let me pay for everything while secretly giving Vesper over $1 million. Across from me, Vesper scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I were being dramatic. Why do you always make things about you, Celine? She muttered, folding her arms over her chest. I turned to her, stunned. She wasn't even trying to deny it. Cormac sighed, leaning back in his chair with the air of a man who had far more important things to deal with than my outburst. You're the responsible one. That's why we trusted you to help. The words landed like a slap. Trusted me? Trusted me to what? Be their personal bank? Sacrifice my future so they wouldn't have to? I shook my head, exhaling sharply. That wasn't trust. That was using me. Cormac's gaze sharpened. And we never forced you. You did it because you wanted to. A tight knot of frustration coiled in my stomach. This was how it always went. He twisted things just enough to make me question myself. You've done so well for yourself, Selena, he continued, his voice calm, reasonable. We never wanted to burden you, but you insisted on helping. Isn't that true? I opened my mouth, then hesitated. I had offered to help, hadn't I? I had stepped in, had written the checks, had kept my mouth shut even when it stung. But that wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I thought they needed me. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice soft, almost gentle. Your father had to think about everyone's future, Celine, she said, as if she were comforting a child. Vesper needed more security. You've always been independent. I gritted my teeth. I wasn't independent. I was abandoned. Vesper let out an incredulous laugh, shaking her head. God, you are so dramatic. I turned to her, my patience fraying. You needed help? Vesper, you went to private school, had a brand new car at 16, and traveled every summer while I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. So what? I didn't ask for any of that. I didn't ask you to be jealous. Jealous. The word settled in my chest like ice. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself, because I realized then that Vesper wasn't capable of seeing the truth. To her, my anger was an attack. My exhaustion was jealousy. My pain was selfishness. Fine, she snapped when I didn't respond. If you hate me that much, I'll just disappear from your life. Cormac's gaze flicked to her, and then, just like that, he saw his opening. See what you've done, Celine? He said smoothly, turning his attention back to me. This isn't about money, it's about family, and you're breaking us apart. I let out a slow breath. And then, something inside me clicked into place. You already broke this family, I said, my voice steady. I just finally opened my eyes. Silence. I pushed back from the table and stood, my legs feeling unsteady. Eleanor reached for me, her fingers brushing my wrist. Celine, wait! I pulled away before she could say anything else. Don't, I said quietly. I know where I stand now. Cormac's voice followed me as I turned toward the door. If you walk out now, don't expect to come back when you realize your mistake. I hesitated only for a second before reaching for the handle. I'm not the one making a mistake, I said. Then I stepped outside. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being alone. The sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket snapped me out of my thoughts. I already knew who it was. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I drove down the darkened road back to my apartment. My hands ached from how tightly I held it, but I didn't let go. My heart was still pounding from what had just happened, the confrontation replaying in my mind, like a scene I couldn't escape. My phone vibrated again. Another call. I ignored it. The glow of the dashboard clock told me it was almost midnight, but I didn't feel tired. Instead, there was a dull, persistent ache sitting heavy in my chest. Did I overreact? The question gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, unwelcome but impossible to ignore. I had just cut off my family, over money. Or was it more than that? Another vibration. This time, I glanced down. 3 missed calls from Eleanor. A few unread texts from Vesper, likely dripping with self-righteous indignation. Nothing from my father. That silence was louder than anything else. I parked outside my apartment, resting my forehead against the steering wheel for a moment, before exhaling sharply. I could still hear Cormac's voice in my head, the way he dismissed me so effortlessly, as if I was the irrational one, as if I had no right to be angry. My phone rang again. Eleanor. I hesitated before answering. Celine, sweetheart, she said immediately, her voice softer than usual. Your father isn't taking this well. I let out a humorless laugh, leaning back against my seat. Oh, I'm sure he's devastated. Don't be like that, she chided, the same way she had when I was a child, refusing to eat my vegetables. You know how he is. He just wants to take care of us all. I closed my eyes. That word again. Care. As if manipulation was a form of love. Take care of who, Mom? Me, or just Vesper? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before continuing. Don't make this about money, Selene. Family is more important than that. I let out a slow breath, pressing my fingers against my temple. That's exactly why I'm doing this. There was silence on the other end, long enough that I could hear her breathing, like she was searching for the right thing to say. But I wasn't interested in whatever excuse was coming next. Before she could respond, I hung up. The weight in my chest shifted. It didn't disappear, but it settled differently, like something that wasn't mine to carry anymore. The phone buzzed again almost immediately, but this time, it wasn't Eleanor. Cassius. I hesitated before picking up. Cass? Now's not a good time. You need to know something, he said, his voice low, urgent. Uncle Cormac, he's not done with you yet. I sat up straighter, my stomach tightening. What do you mean? He's been making calls, talking to the family, spinning the story. Cassius paused, then sighed. He's saying you abandoned us, that you're selfish. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening around the phone. Of course he was. And you? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Do you believe him? There was a moment of silence before Cassius finally said, No. But Celine, you need to be careful. He's planning something. I turned my gaze to the reflection in my window. My own face stared back at me, but I barely recognized it. There was no sadness in my eyes anymore. No hesitation. Just the slow, simmering burn of something that had been waiting to surface for years. I had spent so long wanting to believe they cared about me, that they valued me. But the truth was simple. They only valued what I could do for them. I took a deep breath and sent Cassius one final message. If he wants a fight, he's got one. The war had begun, and I wasn't backing down this time. The first shot came the next morning, an email from my father's lawyer. I barely registered the sunlight filtering through my blinds as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, squinting at the unfamiliar sender. Subject: Urgent, financial dispute, Draven Family Trust. A cold wave of dread settled in my stomach as I opened it. Dear Ms. Draven, your recent refusal to uphold financial commitments to the family has resulted in undue hardship. I sat up abruptly, scanning the rest of the letter. Legal jargon wrapped around one central message. They were trying to make my decision a contractual obligation. I scrolled further. Cormac had retained a law firm to Evaluate the financial responsibilities traditionally maintained by all Draven family members. Evaluate. A dressed-up way of saying he was trying to force my hand through legal pressure. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power. His power over me. I dialed Lucian's number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Celine?" he answered, still groggy. I exhaled sharply. "I think my father is trying to sue me." That woke him up. "What?" I forwarded him the email. A pause followed as he scanned it. "They're testing you," he said finally, "seeing if you'll cave before they escalate." I tightened my grip on the phone. They're underestimating me. Before I could even process the email, my phone rang again. This time, it was my aunt. "Celine, you need to come to the lake house." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "What's happening now?" I asked, voice flat. "Your father is calling a family meeting," she said, the words dripping with something that sounded like forced concern. "We need to talk about all of this, face to face." A setup. I should have ignored it. But if I let them paint me as the villain without even showing up, they'd have more leverage. I grabbed my coat. "Fine, I'm on my way." The moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd walked into an ambush. Every single Draven relative was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the ones who had never once called me unless they needed something. They were all seated, their expressions ranging from judgment to forced sympathy. Cormac stood in the center, like a king addressing his court. "You're breaking this family apart," he said, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. I folded my arms. "I'm setting boundaries." His gaze darkened. "Boundaries? Since when does family need boundaries?" One by one, the others chimed in. "We've always supported you." "Your sister needs you." What kind of daughter turns her back on family? I clenched my fists, scanning their faces. This wasn't about family. This was about control. I inhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. "Funny. I don't recall anyone caring about me when I was the one paying the bills." Silence. Cormac took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't about money," he said smoothly. "It's about unity. You're making a mistake, Celine." I tilted my head. "I think my bank account would disagree." His expression flickered for just a second. Then he sighed, exasperated, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "If this is the path you want to take, don't expect us to clean up your mess when you come running back." I smiled coldly. "I won't." And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out. I didn't stop driving until I reached a coffee shop downtown. I needed space, needed air. As I stepped inside and ordered a coffee, I pulled out my phone and checked my banking app out of habit. Declined. I frowned, refreshing the page. A message flashed across the screen. "This account has been temporarily frozen due to administrative action." I inhaled sharply, switching to my investment accounts. A few transactions were missing. Panic surged through me as my phone buzzed. "Lucian!" "Celine," he said the second I answered. "I was about to call you." "My accounts," I said, gripping the counter. "They're locked." Lucian's voice was tight. "Your father still has influence in certain financial circles. He's trying to cut you off." I closed my eyes for a second, forcing the panic down. Of course. This was his move. Not a lawsuit, not a meeting. This. He was making sure I couldn't stand on my own. My hands shook as I stared at my reflection in the coffee shop window. He wanted me to crawl back. I wouldn't. "Lucian," I said, my voice steely, "start an audit. I want every traceable transaction on my accounts. Find out exactly how he did this." A pause. Then, "You got it." I ended the call and texted Cassius. "They've frozen my money. I need to know everything Cormac is planning. No more waiting. No more hoping they'd come around." For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission. I was preparing for war. Cormac thought he could control me forever. He was wrong. If my father wanted a fight, I was about to show him just how much of his daughter I really was. I spent the night going through my financial records, sorting every document that proved just how much I had poured into my family over the years. The numbers were staggering, far more than I had ever let myself calculate before. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. I had sacrificed everything while Cormac built a future for Vesper. And now he was trying to erase my independence by freezing my accounts. I wouldn't let him. My phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. Hours later, when I finally glanced at the screen, I saw a name I didn't expect. Vesper. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in my gut told me to pick up. I swiped to answer. What do you want? Silence. Then, a shaky breath. Celine, please, I don't know what to do. I froze. Vesper never sounded like this. She was always confident, always smug, always on the winning side of our father's favoritism. What's wrong, Vesper? I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated before whispering, Dad's mad. He says I should have never let anything slip. My grip tightened on the phone. Of course. Cormac wasn't angry about the betrayal. He was angry because she had been sloppy enough to let me find out the truth. And my trust fund, Vesper continued, her voice cracking. It's not what I thought. I don't have access like I thought I would. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Oh, I said, my tone sharp. So now you know what it feels like to be manipulated? Vesper inhaled sharply. I messed up, okay? But please don't shut me out. You don't know what he's like when he's really angry. Something in her voice sent a chill through me. She was afraid. For the first time, I realized that even she wasn't untouchable. Cormac's control didn't come with love. It came with conditions. The moment she stopped being useful, she was just another liability to him. But I wasn't ready to forgive her. Then figure it out, I said, my voice unwavering. Just like I had to. And I hung up. The knock at my door came late that afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something in my gut twisted before I even reached the handle. When I opened it, a man in a navy suit stood there, holding an envelope. Celine Draven? I already knew what this was. You've been served. I took the envelope, my pulse steady despite the rage simmering beneath my skin. I waited until the door clicked shut before tearing it open. Plaintiff, Cormac Draven, defendant, Celine Draven. The document was a formal complaint, accusing me of financial negligence toward the family. Negligence. He was trying to argue that I had an ongoing financial duty to support them. I let out a slow breath, reading through the legal jargon. This wasn't a real lawsuit, it was a power play, a way to put pressure on me, to scare me into submission. But Cormac had miscalculated something. I wasn't scared anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Alaric, my attorney. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. My father just served me legal papers. There was a rustling on the other end. Send them over, I'll take a look. I forwarded the documents while pacing the room, my free hand clenched into a fist. A few minutes later, Alaric let out a low, unimpressed laugh. This is absurd, he said. It won't hold up in court. I know, I muttered, but that's not the point, is it? No, he agreed. It's about intimidation. I exhaled, forcing my mind to slow down. Cormac wasn't expecting me to fight this. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd pay him off just to avoid the hassle. But he had underestimated just how done I was. Then let's make him regret trying, I said. That night, I sat across from Alaric and Lucian in a private office downtown. Alaric flipped through the legal papers, shaking his head. We'll counter with financial records proving you've already paid them over $100,000. This suit won't hold up. Lucian, my financial advisor, leaned forward. And I've begun tracing some interesting transactions on your father's accounts. I raised a brow. What kind of transactions? Lucian's smirk was sharp. He's been moving money, fast. It looks like he's trying to secure assets before anything escalates. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. He was trying to protect himself. I tapped my fingers against the table. Good, I murmured. Let's hit him where it hurts. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. For years, I had played by his rules. I had given, sacrificed, complied. Now I was going to show him exactly what happened when he pushed me too far. My father thought he could keep me under his thumb. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The first crack in my father's carefully built empire came just 2 days later. I was sitting at my desk, staring at legal documents Alaric had sent over, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Your father isn't as untouchable as he thinks." I frowned, my fingers hovering over the screen. "Who is this?" I typed back. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then finally, Dorian Draven. I leaned back in my chair, my stomach twisting. I hadn't heard that name in years. Dorian was my uncle, Cormac's younger brother. The black sheep of the Draven family. The one who had disappeared from family gatherings. The one Cormac never spoke about unless it was to remind everyone how ungrateful and reckless he was. What did he want now? Another message popped up. "Meet me at the old pier. Sunset. It's about your father." I hesitated. Every instinct told me this could be a setup. But then again, Cormac didn't need Dorian to set me up. He had already made his move with the lawsuit and the financial freeze. If Dorian had information, I needed to hear it. Fine. The old pier was empty when I arrived. The wooden planks creaked beneath my feet as I walked toward the railing, scanning the horizon. The sun was bleeding into the water, turning the sky a burnt orange. Then, footsteps behind me. I turned to find Dorian standing a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He looked older than I remembered. Leaner, sharper, like a man who had seen things. He studied me for a moment before nodding. "You look just like your mother." I crossed my arms. "If you called me here to reminisce, I'm leaving." Dorian smirked. "Same fire, too." I didn't respond. He sighed, leaning against the railing. "I stayed out of family affairs for years, but I can't sit by and watch Cormac ruin you." I narrowed my eyes. "And why do you care?" "Because," he said, reaching into his jacket, "I know where your father's real money is." He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the wooden ledge between us. I hesitated for only a second before picking it up and flipping it open. The first page made my breath catch. Offshore accounts, hidden transactions, shell companies. I flipped through, my heart pounding. The numbers were staggering, millions, hidden in places my father never wanted anyone to find. I looked up at Dorian, my pulse hammering. "He's been hiding assets," I said. Dorian nodded. "And if you expose this, his case against you falls apart." I inhaled sharply, staring at the papers in my hands. Cormac's lawsuit was built on the argument that I had a financial obligation to the family. But this proved that he had more than enough to cover anything himself. More than that, it proved he had been lying. Not just to me, but to everyone. I closed the folder. "Why are you giving this to me?" Dorian's smirk faded. "Because I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of Cormac's wrath." His jaw tightened. "And because it's about time someone knocked him off his throne." I studied him for a moment, searching for the angle. But I didn't find one. Dorian wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted to see Cormac lose. I could work with that. An hour later, I sat across from Alaric and Lucian, the folder open on the table between us. Alaric whistled low, flipping through the pages. "This is damning." Lucian leaned forward, his eyes alight with intrigue. "If this is legit, your father isn't just in trouble with you. He could be in trouble with the IRS." I arched a brow. "How much trouble?" Lucian tapped a page with a highlighted wire transfer. "Enough to make him sweat. If he's been funneling money through shell companies, it's only a matter of time before the government notices." Alaric set the folder down, steepling his fingers. "We can use this in negotiations. If he keeps pushing, we push back harder." I exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't on the defensive. I was in control. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. Then let's see how much he enjoys being the one on defense. Cormac built his empire on control. It was time for me to take that away from him. The first warning shot came through a simple email, one that made my father's carefully built world start to tremble. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over my keyboard, rereading the subject line one last time. The truth about Cormac Draven's money. Attached were the financial documents Dorian had given me, offshore accounts, hidden assets, money funneled through layers of shell companies. Proof that my father had been lying not just to me, but to everyone who had ever believed in his carefully crafted illusion of financial struggle. I had considered waiting, strategizing my next move, but then I remembered the lawsuit, the frozen accounts, the way he had turned my own family against me. This couldn't wait. I took a deep breath, my pulse steady. Then, with a single click, I sent the email to every Draven relative, the ones who had accused me of being selfish, the ones who blindly followed Cormac, the ones who needed to see the truth for themselves. The moment it hit their inboxes, my phone exploded with notifications. Cassius called first. I answered on the second ring. "Celine!" he hissed, his voice tight with urgency. "What the hell did you just do?" I leaned back in my chair. "I told the truth." Cassius exhaled sharply. "You don't get it. They're losing it. The whole family is in chaos. People are calling each other, trying to figure out what's real and what isn't." I smiled coldly. "Good." By the time Cassius finished explaining the fallout, I could practically hear the panic through the phone. Cormac was furious. He had spent decades making himself the head of the Draven family, the one everyone turned to, the one they trusted. And now, his empire was crumbling in real time. "He's trying to do damage control," Cassius continued, his voice low. "But the numbers don't lie, Celine. This isn't just gossip. This is proof." I pictured it. Cormac pacing in his office, barking orders into the phone, trying to convince his loyalists that I was the villain. "Some of the aunts and uncles are backing off," Cassius added. "You know what they're saying? He told us the family was struggling. That's why we defended him." I let out a bitter laugh. "And now they're realizing they were nothing but pawns." Cassius hesitated. "Not all of them. Some still think you're the problem, that you've humiliated him." Of course, some people would never accept the truth, even when it was staring them in the face. Then my phone buzzed again. Another incoming call. "Eleanor." I clenched my jaw. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to hear it. I took a slow breath and picked up. "Hello, Mother." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Celine," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "How could you?" The sheer disbelief in her tone sent a flash of irritation through me. I gripped my phone. "How could I?" I repeated, my voice turning cold. "How could you? How could you let him do this for years?" Eleanor's breath hitched. "It's not that simple." "It is," I shot back. "You knew. Maybe not the details, but you knew what he was doing wasn't right. And you let it happen." She didn't deny it, but she didn't admit it either. Instead, she said the one thing that infuriated me more than anything else. "You've gone too far, Celine." A cold laugh escaped my lips. "No, Mom, I haven't gone far enough." And with that, I ended the call. That night, as I sat in my apartment, a final message came in, from Cormac. It was short, chilling. "You think you've won. You have no idea what's coming next." I stared at the words, my grip tightening around my phone. For the first time, a sliver of unease crept in. Not because I was afraid of him financially. That battle was already turning in my favor. This was different. Cormac was desperate now, and a desperate man was unpredictable. I stood up, walking to my front door and sliding the deadbolt into place, because I knew his next move wouldn't just be financial. It would be personal. The first sign that my father had truly lost control came the next morning when I opened my front door to find an eviction notice taped to it. For a moment, I just stared at it, my brain struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Eviction? I lived alone. I paid my bills on time. There was no reason. Then, like a slow, creeping shadow, the realization settled in. This wasn't about missed payments. This was him. I snatched the paper off the door, my eyes scanning the fine print. Leased property owner, Cormac Draven. I inhaled sharply, my grip tightening around the paper. Of course. My father owned the apartment complex. I had never even thought about it before, never questioned how easily my lease had been approved. But now he was terminating my lease as another move in his twisted game. My phone was in my hand before I even realized I had grabbed it. I dialed my landlord's number, pressing the phone to my ear. He picked up on the third ring. Ms. Draven. His voice was hesitant. He already knew why I was calling. I forced my voice to stay calm. There's been a mistake. I just found an eviction notice on my door. A pause. Then, it's not a mistake. Ice settled in my veins. What? Another pause. Then, finally, he sighed. Your father owns the property, and he's terminating your lease effective immediately. I closed my eyes. Of course he is. I exhaled slowly, my pulse pounding. I see. I'm sorry, my landlord added quickly, his tone softer. I really am. But there's nothing I can do. There never was. Without another word, I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter, pressing my hands against the surface as I tried to breathe through the anger threatening to consume me. He thought he could break me like this. Number, not today. The knock on my door came later that afternoon. I wasn't expecting company, but when I swung the door open, I found Vesper standing there. And she looked like hell. Her usual flawless appearance was gone. Her hair was a mess, her clothes disheveled, her eyes rimmed red. She looked at me like she'd barely recognized me, like she didn't know whether I was her enemy or her last chance. I folded my arms. What do you want? Vesper opened her mouth, then hesitated. Then, in a shaky, broken voice, she whispered, It's gone. I frowned. What's gone? She let out a trembling breath, gripping the doorframe like she needed something solid to hold on to. The money, she choked out. Everything. I didn't react. Not at first. I just stared at her, waiting for the inevitable punchline. You mean the trust fund? I asked, voice flat. The one that wasn't a big deal? Vesper flinched. She looked at me, desperate, pleading. You don't get it, she said, her voice raw. Dad drained it to cover himself. The words hit me like a slap. I blinked. Wait, you're saying the trust fund wasn't even for you? She shook her head quickly, biting her lip, realizing the truth herself as she said it out loud. He told me it was mine, she whispered, that it was for my future. But it was never really mine, was it? It never was. I let out a slow, bitter breath. She was just another pawn, just like I had been. I should have felt sorry for her. Maybe part of me did. But another part wanted her to know, to really understand, what it felt like to have everything you had been promised ripped away in an instant. I stepped back, meeting her tear-filled gaze. Welcome to reality, Vesper. Then I shut the door. An hour later, I sat across from Alaric and Lucien, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. Lucien smirked as he flipped through the newest reports on my father's accounts. Your father is burning through money faster than I thought, he said, amused. This isn't just about you anymore. He's trying to save himself. I leaned forward. How bad is it? Lucien turned a page. If he keeps moving money like this, he won't last another 6 months without something collapsing. I let that sink in. 6 months. Cormac had spent years building an empire of control. And now? It was slipping through his fingers. Alaric, who had been scanning the legal documents in front of him, let out a low hum. If he's desperate enough to drain Vesper's trust fund, he's losing control. I exhaled. He was crumbling. And for the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. I met their eyes, my voice steady. Then let's push him over the edge. My father had spent years making me believe I was powerless. Now it was time to show him how wrong he was. The first step in my plan came with a simple move, taking back something that should have been mine all along. I walked into Alaric's office, setting down a thick stack of documents on his desk. He glanced up from his computer, raising an eyebrow as he reached for them. "What's this?" I took a seat across from him, crossing my legs. "Proof that I've paid the property taxes on the lake house for 5 years. Alaric flipped through the pages, scanning the records with a slow, deliberate nod. When he reached the final document, he let out a low whistle. "You want to challenge ownership?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "That house is as much mine as it is his." Technically, the house was still under my father's name, but legally, I had grounds to fight for it. I had shouldered every financial burden while he had hoarded money in secret accounts. If he wanted to play dirty, I was more than willing to throw the first legal punch. Alaric smirked. "You might have a case, and even if we don't win, filing a legal claim will put pressure on him." I exhaled slowly. That was the real goal. This wasn't just about a house. This was about sending a message. I was done letting him take from me. I was still in Alaric's office when my phone buzzed. Lucian's name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately. "What's wrong?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the phone. Lucian's voice was sharp, urgent. "Celine, your father is under investigation." The air around me shifted. I sat up straighter. "For what?" Lucian let out a breath. "Dorian's files. They were enough for authorities to take notice." I gripped the phone. "Who's looking into him?" "The IRS." A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. For years, my father had moved money through hidden channels, convinced no one would ever catch him. But Dorian's documents had done more than just expose his personal deception. It had sent a red flag straight to the authorities. "This isn't just about you anymore," Lucian continued. "This is big. If the investigation digs deep enough, he could be in serious legal trouble." For the first time, my father was truly vulnerable. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me. This was the moment he started to lose everything. And I wasn't going to stop it. I was going to watch it happen. The pounding on my apartment door came that night. I knew who it was before I even looked. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door to find Cormac standing there, his face red with fury. He pushed past me before I could say anything, storming into my living room like he still owned everything I touched. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his voice shaking. I shut the door behind me, slowly turning to face him. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. "I think," I said, my voice calm, "you're finally out of moves." His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You have no idea what you've done." I tilted my head. "Haven't I?" He took a step closer, his rage barely contained. But I didn't move. For years, this man had dictated my life, had controlled me, manipulated me, made me believe that without him, I had nothing. But now the truth was clear. It was him who was losing. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. And that meant I was finally winning. I didn't expect his next move to come so soon, and I certainly didn't expect it to be this dangerous. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. It wasn't the frantic knock of a friend or the hesitant rap of a neighbor. This was forceful, purposeful, a demand. I swung my legs off the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mind, still fogged with sleep, scrambled through possibilities. Had Cormac finally lost it? I pulled the door open just enough to see who was standing outside. A process server. My stomach dropped. "Ms. Draven?" he asked, his tone neutral, professional. He extended an envelope toward me. "You've been served." I took it with unsteady hands, my fingers tightening around the thick packet of legal documents. The words on the front page hit me like a brick to the chest. Plaintiff, Cormac Draven. Defendant, Celine Draven. I forced myself to keep reading. He was suing me for defamation and financial damages, claiming I had sabotaged the family business with my accusations, that my public exposure of his finances had led to irreparable losses. I exhaled slowly. This was his final legal attack, not because he had any chance of winning, but because he wanted to bury me in court battles, to drain my resources, to make me suffer. But as I stood in my doorway, gripping that lawsuit, something inside me shifted. He's trying to scare me. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid. I pulled out my phone and dialed Alaric. He picked up immediately. "I was expecting your call." I let out a humorless laugh. "You already saw the papers?" "Yeah," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "And your father just made a mistake." I frowned. "How?" "Because he just put himself under an even bigger microscope. Defamation cases require proof. And guess what? The only thing he has are financial documents that are already under federal investigation." I inhaled sharply. He was right. Cormac's desperation had just backfired, and I was about to use it against him. That evening, another knock came at my door. This time, it wasn't a process server. It was Vesper. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the door. She looked broken. Her usual confidence, her perfect composure, it was gone. Her eyes were red, her posture slumped, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside. She walked in without a word and sank onto my couch, staring blankly at the floor. "Everything's falling apart, Celine," she whispered after a long silence. I crossed my arms. "It already fell apart, Vesper. You're just finally seeing it." She swallowed hard. "He's not the same." I studied her carefully. "He never was. You just didn't see it before." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something raw. "I don't know how to survive without him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were like an echo of my own past, of the fear I had felt before I finally let go. But I wasn't going to save her. Not this time. She had to learn, just like I did. "Then it's time to figure it out," I said. She didn't argue. She just nodded, like she finally understood that no one was coming to rescue her. That night, the tension in my chest should have eased. It didn't. I was winning, but it still felt like something was waiting. Something unfinished. And then, a sound outside my window. I froze. Slowly, I stepped toward the blinds, heart pounding. Peeking through the slats, my breath caught in my throat. My father was standing outside, not knocking, not yelling, just standing there, watching. A slow, sickening chill crawled down my spine. This isn't about money anymore. This was about control. I snatched my phone and dialed Cassius. The second he answered, I whispered, "He's here." Silence. Then, "Shit, lock your doors. I'm on my way." I pressed the deadbolt into place, my hand shaking. For the first time, I truly felt unsafe. I had taken everything from him, his power, his money, his control. But a desperate man is a dangerous one. The knock at my door came just after midnight, and I knew this time it wasn't my father. I still held the baseball bat in my hands as I approached the door, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The apartment was silent, except for the steady thudding against the wood. I hesitated, then peeked through the peephole. Cassius. Relief hit me so fast, it nearly knocked me off balance. I unlatched the deadbolt and yanked open the door. "I thought it was him," I admitted, my voice raw. Cassius stepped inside without hesitation, locking the door behind him. His expression was tense, his eyes scanning my apartment like he expected my father to materialize out of the shadows. "It's worse than I thought, Celine," he said grimly. "He's unraveling." I tightened my grip on the bat. "I already knew that." "What happened?" I demanded. Cassius hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I need you to hear this." Cassius hit play. A voice crackled through the speaker, deep, familiar. "Dorian. I have financial records proving Cormac has committed fraud," his voice said, low and urgent. Offshore accounts, fake investments. If you push him, he'll break. I sucked in a sharp breath. Fraud? This wasn't just hidden money. This was illegal. Cassius locked eyes with me. Dorian was careful, but he's been holding on to this for years. He was waiting for the right time. I swallowed, my mind racing. If we release this— Cassius nodded. It won't just ruin him, Celine. It could send him to prison. I exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside me. Cormac had been untouchable for decades, a man who built an empire on lies and control, who convinced everyone, including me, that he would always win. But now, I had everything I needed to end him. My fingers curled into fists. Then let's make sure he does. My phone rang. I flinched at the sudden sound, my pulse spiking. When I saw the name on the screen, my stomach twisted. Mom! Cassius frowned. Don't answer it! But something in my gut told me I had to. I swiped to accept the call. Mom? Her voice was trembling. Celine! He's coming for you! My blood turned to ice. What? He knows what you're doing, she sobbed. He says if he's going down, he's taking you with him. I clenched my jaw. Did he threaten me? Silence. Then, he didn't have to. Cassius reached for my phone. I shook my head, gripping it tighter. I inhaled slowly, steadying my voice. Let him come, I said, my voice steel. I'm ready. I had taken his power, his wealth, his reputation. Now I was about to take his freedom. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office with one goal: ending this once and for all. Alaric was already waiting for me, a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, stacks of paperwork spread across his desk. He looked up as I entered, studying me carefully. Are you sure about this? He asked. I nodded, setting my bag down. We go public. Alaric exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I met his gaze, my shoulders squaring. I don't want to turn back. This was it, the final strike, the one that would bury Cormac. I pulled out the files, the full record of his offshore accounts, illegal transfers, fraudulent loans, everything Dorian had uncovered, everything my father had spent years hiding. Alaric's expression was unreadable as he flipped through the pages. This is solid, he admitted. The press will tear him apart. The feds will have no choice but to dig deeper. Good, I said, because I want the world to see exactly who he is. The headlines hit within hours. Prominent businessman under federal investigation. Cormac Draven accused of fraud, embezzlement, and financial crimes. Draven Empire in freefall after shocking revelations. It was everywhere. The media pounced, picking apart every shady transaction, every questionable business deal. Investigators began circling, faster than even I had expected. I watched the chaos unfold from my apartment, the news flashing across the screen, social media buzzing with speculation. Then my phone rang. I didn't have to check the caller ID. I knew it was him. I answered. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, you just signed your own death sentence. His voice was low, laced with a fury so sharp it almost cut through the line. But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I leaned back, gripping the phone tightly. My voice was steady. No, Dad. I just signed yours. The fallout was immediate. Eleanor refused to speak to me. Vesper showed up at my door, her face pale, her voice small. Did you really have to destroy him? I didn't flinch. He did that to himself. Vesper opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like understanding. Cassius, standing in the corner, shook his head in disbelief. You actually did it. I met his gaze. I told you I would. For the first time, Cormac had no control, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try to take me down with him. The next morning, I woke up to a news alert. Cormac had been arrested. My phone screen glowed in the dim light of my apartment. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked it, scrolling through the breaking news banner. Prominent businessman Cormac Draven arrested for fraud and tax evasion. I sucked in a sharp breath and quickly reached for the remote, turning on the TV. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. Live footage of my father being led out of his office in handcuffs. His normally polished suit was wrinkled, his face set in an unreadable expression as he was escorted into a police vehicle. A swarm of reporters shouted questions at him, cameras flashing in rapid bursts. "Mr. Draven, do you have anything to say about the charges? Are you denying the allegations? What about the offshore accounts? The missing funds?" Cormac didn't respond. He just kept walking, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of my couch. This is it. This is what I fought for. I had won. So why did it feel hollow? I barely had time to process before the next storm arrived. A loud bang rattled my apartment door. I barely had time to stand before it swung open and Vesper stormed inside. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale with fury, her hands shaking as she slammed the door behind her. "You ruined everything!" she screamed. I stared at her, unfazed. "I saved myself!" Vesper let out a bitter, almost hysterical laugh. "Saved yourself? You burned everything to the ground!" I crossed my arms. "No, Vesper, he did. I just refused to keep covering for him." Tears welled in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do now, Celine?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I held her gaze, my tone softer but firm. "Figure it out," I said. Just like I did. She let out a choked sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. For the first time, I saw it. Real fear. Not of losing money, not of losing comfort, but of having no one left to clean up the mess. She shook her head, backing toward the door. "You think you're better than all of us?" I sighed. "No, Vesper. I just finally stopped letting him break me." She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she just turned and walked out. And this time, I didn't stop her. I checked my phone again, half expecting a message from Eleanor. It never came. For hours, I waited. I convinced myself she just needed time, that she would reach out. Finally, I gave in and sent the first message. "Mom, are you okay?" The 3 dots appeared. I held my breath. Then, they disappeared. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. She chose him over me. I closed my phone, the realization settling in. I had won the battle, but some wars don't end cleanly. The first sign that my father wasn't done with me came in the form of a letter, one written from prison. I found it in my mailbox, a plain white envelope with his name in the return address. My stomach twisted as I held it in my hands, my fingers cold despite the warm morning air. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I carried it inside and sat at my kitchen table, staring at it for far too long before finally tearing it open. The letter was handwritten, his neat, precise script filling the page. "Celine, I always knew you were strong. But strength is a dangerous thing when it blinds you. You don't see the full picture yet. You think you've won, but you never stop to ask yourself, what did I let you win? There's more at play than you understand. And when you finally see it, it'll be too late. Love, Dad." My hands clenched around the paper. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. And I had no idea what it meant. I spent the rest of the morning trying to shake off the unease, but it clung to me like a second skin. I forced myself to move on with my day. But then, my phone buzzed. "Lucian." I answered immediately. "What's wrong?" His voice was tense. "We found something in your father's financials." I went still. "What do you mean?" Lucian exhaled sharply. "Before his arrest, Cormac moved a significant amount of money into an account under your name." I stopped breathing. "What?" Lucian's voice turned grim. "He set it up to make it look like you were involved. If the investigation digs into this, it won't just be about him anymore." My pulse pounded. This was it. The last move in his twisted game. Even from behind bars, he was still trying to control me. I had no choice. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to hear him say it. The prison was cold, sterile, the walls too bright, too white. I sat across from the only man I had ever feared, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't untouchable anymore. Cormac smiled, leaning back in his seat, completely at ease. "You finally came!" I folded my arms. "You tried to ruin me, even from in here." His smile didn't falter. "I only gave you an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you." I clenched my jaw. He was still pretending this was a lesson, a game. "No, Dad. What I do now is up to me." For the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. Not anger, not amusement, defeat. I had finally won. I walked out of that prison without looking back. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The final battle wasn't against my father. It was against the version of me he had created. I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights. The distant hum of traffic filled the silence, the glow of the skyline stretching endlessly before me. Everything should have felt like a victory. Cormac was gone, his empire crumbling, his influence shattered. But instead, there was emptiness. For years, my life had revolved around fighting him, proving myself, defying him, escaping him. Now that it was over, I found myself asking the question I had avoided for so long. Did I win? Or did I just destroy the only family I had left? My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. "Cassius." "You did the right thing, Celine." I exhaled, staring at the message. Did I? I wasn't sure. The next morning, I made a final choice. I walked into a small coffee shop, my coat wrapped tightly around me, and saw Vesper already waiting. She looked different, less polished, more fragile. I slid into the seat across from her. She met my gaze. "So, is this it?" I nodded. "I can't keep saving you, or Mom, or Dad. We all have to live with our choices." Her hands curled around her coffee cup, her knuckles white. "I don't know how to live without him," she admitted. I didn't flinch. "Then start learning." Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded. For the first time, she understood. I wasn't coming back. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand once. Then I stood and walked away. I didn't look back. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Lucien in his office. A stack of papers sat between us, the final legal document severing my financial ties to the Draven name. He slid a pen toward me. "This is it," he said. "Once you sign, you're free." I picked up the pen, pausing for only a moment before signing my name. Lucien smirked. "So, what's next?" I glanced out the window, watching the sunlight pour over the city. "For the first time," I said slowly, smiling, "I don't know." And I loved that. I had spent my life trying to prove my worth to a family that never saw me. Now, I was finally learning how to see myself. Freedom wasn't about escaping my past. It was about choosing my future. The past would always be there, a shadow at my back. But for the first time, I wasn't letting it define me. I was making choices for myself. And the first one came in the form of a voicemail. I saw my mother's name flash across my phone screen that morning. I didn't pick up. Instead, I let it go to voicemail, the weight in my chest heavier than I expected. A part of me had already decided. There was no going back. Still, later that evening, when the apartment was quiet, I played the message. Her voice was hesitant, strained. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I wanted to say I love you." Silence. Then a soft exhale, a voice almost too quiet to hear. "I'm sorry, Celine." I sat there, listening to the message twice, feeling the familiar ache, the pull of what could have been. But some things aren't meant to be fixed. With a deep breath, I deleted the voicemail and chose peace. 2 days later, I stood in front of a real estate office, my fingers tightening around a new set of keys. Lucien leaned against his car, arms crossed, watching me with an amused expression. "So, this is it?" he asked. I turned the key over in my hand, smiling. Yeah, my first place. That's actually mine. No contracts, no expectations, no debts owed to a man who had spent his life owning me. Just freedom. Lucian let out a low whistle. Damn! I was half expecting you to change your mind and move to another city. I smirked. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet. I stepped into my new home, placing a single box on the floor. The space was empty, the walls bare, but instead of feeling overwhelming, it felt full of possibilities. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the kitchen counter. Mine. Everything about this life was mine now. No looking over my shoulder, no waiting for the next demand, no carrying the weight of a family that never truly saw me. Me, just freedom. I closed my eyes, breathing in the quiet. I didn't escape my past. I reclaimed my future. You know, freedom isn't just about walking away from the past. It's about choosing what comes next. I spent my whole life proving my worth to people who never really saw me. But the truth? I was enough all along. Let this be your reminder. You don't have to stay where you're not valued. You don't have to keep giving to those who only take. You get to choose. Your worth isn't defined by anyone else. It's defined by you. And if this message speaks to you, if you're ready to step into your own power, hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning. Hello, my name is Caroline. Last Christmas, my mother and stepfather raised their glasses to family, then turned around and locked me outside in a snowstorm. He called me a freeloader. She slammed the door. I sat in my frozen car, shaking with fever, staring through their warm windows while they laughed without me. But that wasn't the worst part. They didn't just forget me. They planned it. Slowly, quietly. They drained my bank account, rewrote my father's will, handed my life to someone else in silk gloves. And when I tried to speak up, they told me I was being dramatic. Do you want to know how far a family will go to erase you? And what happens when the forgotten daughter stops being quiet? I stepped into the dining room just as the wind slammed the front door shut behind me. Everyone turned for a brief second, just long enough to register my presence, then went right back to their laughter and wine glasses. The air smelled like glazed ham, sweet potatoes, and something artificial, like too much candle wax from store-bought centerpieces. I hadn't known there would be so many people. The lights sparkled off the glassware in that too-perfect way my mother loved. She had always been about appearances. The centerpiece was a symmetrical mix of silver pine cones and holly berries. Even the napkins were folded into origami stars. Everything looked like a magazine spread, except for me. I wore a dark sweater and jeans, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't told there'd be guests, much less a photo op. I thought it was just family this year. Apparently, I thought wrong. The only open seat was at the very end of the table, barely within earshot of the conversation, shoved near the swinging kitchen door. And it wasn't a dining chair like the rest. It was a collapsible metal folding one, the kind you'd find in a church basement. No cushion, wobbly legs. As if it had been thrown in at the last second, like me, I pulled it out slowly and sat down. No one noticed. They always said I was too sensitive, I thought, unfolding the napkin on my lap. So, this year, I didn't ask questions. I showed up, I smiled, I even made Mom's old stuffing recipe. Not that anyone noticed. My stepsister, Seraphine, sat across the table in a designer cardigan that probably cost more than my entire winter wardrobe. Her hair was perfectly curled, her nails bright red, and her phone was out, camera tilted at the perfect angle. "Family Christmas," she giggled, typing out her caption. #blessed. She didn't even glance in my direction. I wasn't in the frame. Not that I expected to be. The carving knife was passed right over my head to someone else. When I reached for bread, someone's elbow blocked my hand. And when I cleared my throat to ask if anyone wanted more stuffing, the one thing I had actually contributed, no one answered. Toasts began. Isolde, my mother, stood with her wine glass raised. She looked radiant, no doubt thanks to her Botox budget and Darius's latest bonus. To Darius, she declared, her voice bright, for bringing structure, elegance, and direction into our lives. This home, This family wouldn't be the same without him. I tried not to react, just kept my smile in place, hands folded tight under the table. Darius lifted his glass, nodded with that smug charm he wore like cologne. Well, it's easy to lead when you have a family that follows. I fidgeted in my chair, my fork scraped against the plate. No one looked my way. Seraphine leaned over to one of her influencer friends and whispered something that made them both snort laugh. I had a feeling it was about me. A relative, some cousin of Darius's, I think, asked Seraphine if she was really getting a new car for New Year's. She beamed. A Range Rover. Dad says it's time I leveled up. Darius grinned. She deserves it. Always so responsible. I wanted to scream. Instead, I bit down on my tongue. I tried, once, to interject. I made the apple. Isolde waved a dismissive hand. Let Seraphine speak, darling. Of course. That's when Darius stood up again, holding his wine like a prop in a stage play. Here's to families who pull their weight, he said, looking directly across the table. But not at me. Not exactly. Just close enough for everyone to understand who he meant. This house isn't for freeloaders. A few chuckles broke out. One person raised their brow. Isolde. She sipped her wine. Seraphine smirked behind her glass. I froze. The words echoed so loudly in my ears, it was like everything else had gone mute. Freeloader. I had worked 3 part-time jobs last year, cared for my father while he was dying, and dropped everything to be there when Mom needed help settling the estate. But none of that mattered. Not here. Not to them. My cheeks flushed, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that. I placed my fork down gently, folded my napkin on the plate, and stood up. No one looked at me. I walked slowly toward the hallway, grabbed my coat from the hook by the door. My shoes were still wet from earlier, but I slid them on without a word. The front door creaked when I opened it. The cold hit hard, like reality. I stepped out onto the porch and shut the door behind me. The wind howled. Snow swirled in small, angry flurries across the front lawn. The windows glowed golden from the inside, flickering with warmth. I wasn't welcome in. I pulled the coat tighter around me and stood there a moment longer, trying to catch my breath. I waited, just in case. Maybe someone would realize I left. Maybe Mom would come check. Maybe Seraphine would pretend to care. No one came. No one noticed. I stood there as long as I could, and when the cold started to creep under my collar, I looked back through the window. Seraphine was already taking another photo. Darius was laughing. My mother was topping off her own wine. That was the moment it finally clicked, the second where everything hardened inside me, not with rage, but with truth. They weren't just being careless, they wanted me invisible. I turned away from the window and stepped off the porch. It's strange, the way sound changes in the snow. Everything gets quieter, but sharper. My footsteps made these little crunches as I walked down the steps, crisp, deliberate, like I was trying not to wake something I couldn't see. The porch light flickered above me, casting a warm cone of light that didn't reach far into the freezing darkness. I stood there for a second, just long enough to think, maybe I was overreacting. Maybe someone didn't know I'd stepped outside. Maybe, just maybe, if I went back in, this whole evening could still be salvageable. I turned and reached for the door handle, locked. At first, I just blinked at it. Then I tested it again, more deliberately. It didn't budge. I knocked lightly with the side of my fist. Nothing. So I knocked harder. Still nothing. The wind pushed my hair into my face. I tucked it behind my ear with a hand that was already starting to ache from the cold. One more knock, this time a full-on rap of my knuckles. Finally, footsteps. The door creaked open just a few inches. It was Darius. He didn't look surprised to see me. Didn't ask why I was out there. Didn't even act like it was odd I had left the table during Christmas dinner. Instead, he gave me a look that said he was tired of this, of me. And then he said it, like he'd been waiting for the moment. Go sleep it off, and take your drama somewhere else. And then, just like that, the door clicked shut again. The wind howled a little louder as if it had been waiting for its cue. For a full 5 seconds, I didn't move. My brain didn't want to catch up to what just happened. I stared at the door. The door I grew up opening every day after school. The one my father had painted red because Mom once said it looked inviting. That door used to mean safety. Now, it was nothing but a line I'd been pushed behind. I walked down the front steps in slow motion. The snow had gotten deeper, up past my ankles now, and I could already feel the wet starting to seep through my socks. My fingers burned from the cold, the kind of sting that promises worse pain is coming. The wind whipped at my face as I made my way toward my car, parked halfway down the block since Seraphine's brand new SUV and her friends' cars had filled the driveway. By the time I got to the Subaru, my nose was running and my eyes were watering. Not from crying, just from sheer exposure. I climbed into the back seat and slammed the door shut behind me, trying to trap what little warmth remained inside. The air was stale, thick with old takeout bags and coffee cups I hadn't cleaned out in weeks. I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a blanket that barely covered my legs, and wrapped myself in it. Not that it did much. My teeth were chattering. I turned the ignition, hoping, praying. The car sputtered. Then again. Finally, the engine caught with a rough hum. The vents blew out a whisper of lukewarm air. It wasn't going to last long. The gas light blinked, and I knew I didn't have more than maybe 30-40 minutes of heat. I plugged in my phone. 7% battery left, no charger in the car. Of course, because tonight wasn't done making a point. I scrolled through my messages anyway. There weren't many. A couple from my college roommate from 2 years ago. Someone who probably wouldn't answer if I called. Some old group chats that had long since gone quiet. Nothing from Mom. Nothing from anyone inside that house. No one was looking for me. I curled deeper into the blanket, pulled my coat tighter around me, and leaned my head back against the seat. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent and steady, like it had a job to do. It felt familiar, this kind of silence, the kind that isn't peaceful, the kind that feels like you've been erased from your own life. I watched the frost creep along the inside of the windshield, watched my breath puff out like smoke. My fingers moved on their own. I opened the camera and snapped a photo. Just a quick one, me in the dark, cheeks red, nose raw, wrapped in a sad excuse for warmth. I didn't take it for attention. I took it so that I wouldn't forget this feeling, so I'd never again let someone tell me it didn't happen. The cold started to settle into my bones. I flexed my toes, but they barely responded. I tried turning the vents up, but the air was already cooling down again. Not enough fuel. I shut off the engine. Everything went quiet. I thought about the first Christmas after Dad died. How Mom had refused to use any of his ornaments, said it was too soon. I remembered how she donated all his coats, except for the red wool one he used to wrap me in after sledding. That one had mysteriously gone missing when she remodeled my room the next spring. Isolde didn't like reminders, and tonight I'd finally become one too many. My eyes were getting heavy. My fingers had stopped hurting. They'd gone numb instead. I looked at my phone one last time. 3% battery. I opened notes, typed out one sentence. If I disappear tonight, tell the truth. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. It was just insurance, just in case. The last thing I heard before I finally slipped into something between sleep and unconsciousness wasn't a siren or a phone ringing. It was Darius's voice, crystal clear in my head. This house isn't for freeloaders. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe I wasn't a part of that house anymore. But I wasn't done. Not yet. When I opened my eyes again, everything outside the car had turned white. The windshield was buried in a soft, thick blanket of snow, only a narrow slit remaining clear where the defroster had fought its losing battle. I sat up slowly, stiff and shivering, a dull ache behind my eyes like I'd been crying in my sleep. Except I hadn't cried. Not a single tear. The car was ice cold again. My breath came out in visible puffs. I fumbled with my coat, pulling it tighter, then shoved my hands under my thighs for warmth. The engine was off now. I must have turned it off at some point to save gas. Or maybe it had sputtered out on its own. I didn't even remember closing my eyes. That frightened me more than anything else. I blinked a few times, forcing myself to stay alert, and then reached over to the glove compartment. Somewhere in there was a half-crushed granola bar and a backup charger I hadn't used in months. My fingers were so numb I could barely grip it, but I managed to plug it in and connect my phone. 2% battery. Just enough. I tapped the screen and the lock screen lit up, cold blue light piercing the dim cabin. The time read 8:47 p.m. I'd been out here for over an hour. I hesitated for a beat, then opened Instagram. Part of me didn't want to, but something heavier than curiosity pushed me forward, a need to confirm what I already knew. The way people check an empty room twice just to feel worse. There it was, Seraphine's latest post, just 15 minutes old. A perfectly lit photo of the entire dining room, twinkling lights and all. Isolde in her cream sweater, smiling with one hand delicately resting on Darius's arm. Seraphine in the center, holding a wine glass, laughing like she'd never known disappointment. Even that awful neighbor with the yappy dog was there, seated at the end of the table. Everyone was in the shot. Except me. The caption read, "Couldn't have asked for a more perfect family night. Bag. Family. First. Christmas magic." Perfect. That word hit harder than the wind. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something meaner. It wasn't just that they hadn't looked for me. It was that they were fine without me, thriving even, laughing, celebrating, crafting memories they knew I wasn't part of and documenting them proudly. They didn't forget me. They erased me, deliberately, cleanly, like I'd been smudged out of a photo frame and replaced with glitter and fake laughter. I saved the post. Then I downloaded it again. I wasn't sure why. Maybe for proof. Maybe because some part of me knew this would be important later, not just emotionally, but practically. There's power in documentation, evidence, receipts. My battery dipped to 1%. I let the screen go dark. From the house, music swelled, a Christmas classic, too cheerful for the occasion. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of laughter. Not distant, but loud, direct, as if someone had turned up the volume on purpose. It was calculated. Someone inside wanted me to hear them. I shifted in my seat and angled toward the window, wiping away a thin line of fog with my sleeve. Through the sliver of visible glass, I could make out Seraphine twirling in the living room, her arms raised like she was on stage. Darius was clapping. Isolde held up a flute of champagne. The lights sparkled off the ornaments, casting golden shimmers across their polished hardwood floor. No one glanced outside, not even once. They had forgotten me in a way that didn't come from neglect. It came from intention. I thought back to when I was 8, sitting at that same table next to my dad. He used to carve the turkey like it was a ceremony. He'd always save me the wishbone, told me I could make my own luck if I tried hard enough. Now, I was watching strangers pretend I had never existed. I didn't sob. I didn't scream. The tears didn't come. Instead, I went completely still. There's a different kind of pain when you stop expecting anything at all. It doesn't break you right away. It just carves you hollow from the inside. Quietly. I sat like that for what felt like a long time, the cold creeping up my legs. The sound of muffled celebration growing more unbearable with each passing minute. Then I whispered it to no one. Not perfect. Not anymore. That's when the car light flickered off. My phone finally died. I was left with nothing but silence, snow, and the hum of injustice settling in my chest like smoke. It might have ended there, me frozen in that car like some discarded ornament. But someone else had seen that photo. And they weren't laughing. It was my grandmother. And she wasn't just coming to check in. She was coming for war. I didn't know it then, sitting in that freezing car with nothing but the hum of my own breath, but 2 blocks away, in a smaller house with a sagging porch and a crooked wind chime, my grandmother had already seen the photo. My absence in that glittery, perfect family night post was all the evidence she needed. But before she showed up with wool blankets and fire in her eyes, I sat there, alone, and remembered. Not the kind of memories that make you nostalgic, but the kind that burn your throat before you even open your mouth to speak. My phone had died completely. No signal, no music, no distraction. Only silence and the stinging whisper of memory finding its way in. Earlier that evening, before the wine, before the toast, before I became a ghost in my own mother's home, I was standing near the coat closet, adjusting the zipper on my sweater. I had arrived early. I always did. I thought maybe this year would be different if I tried harder. That's when I heard them. It was Aunt Doreen and her husband Tom. Not really my aunt and uncle, but the titles had stuck from my childhood. They stood just outside the living room archway, voices low but not careful. "She's just like her father," Doreen muttered, her tone clipped, the kind of voice that wraps judgment in a veneer of politeness. "Always the burden no one talks about." Tom let out a snort that sounded like he was trying not to laugh. "Well, at least Darius is trying to clean things up. House looks better. Family looks better." And then the clink of glasses. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. They were just 10 feet away, facing the other direction, speaking like I wasn't real, like I was background noise, something uninvited, inconvenient, furniture. I stepped back into the hallway before they could turn and see me. My hands were shaking, but not from anger, not yet. It was something deeper, like my body was catching up to the reality my heart had been trying to ignore. I'd spent the entire week before Christmas baking. Not fancy cookies, not Instagram-friendly peppermint bark. Just one thing, a pie. Apple cinnamon. My mom's favorite, or at least it used to be. The recipe wasn't printed, it was handwritten, the ink faded, the paper folded at the edges. It was something she used to make with me every December before things shifted. Before Darius moved in. Before Seraphine started calling her mom in that sugary voice like it had always been hers to use. I bought the ingredients with the last $50 in my checking account. It wasn't much, but it was something I could offer. Something real. I wrapped the pie dish in foil, tied a green ribbon around the box, and tucked a note inside. For Mom. Love, Caroline. Simple. I placed it in the fridge that afternoon and didn't say anything. I thought she'd find it and smile. Maybe it would soften something in her. Maybe it would remind her who I was. Later that night, after dinner, but before the insults began, I walked into the kitchen to grab some water. The trash bin was full, the lid open just a crack. I didn't mean to look inside, but I saw the foil, the green ribbon, the note, still taped on. She hadn't even unwrapped it. It hadn't been forgotten. It had been thrown away. Intentionally. Silently. Meanwhile, Seraphine's luxury gift basket, stuffed with lotions and wine and branded chocolates, sat in the center of the living room, admired, praised, photographed. They didn't throw it away out of space, I remember thinking, my fingers clenched around the water glass. They threw it away to make space. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't part of the family anymore. Back in the car, the memory wrapped around me tighter than the blanket ever could. The ache in my chest wasn't the cold. It was humiliation calcifying into something sharper. Not just sadness. Not even anger. Resolve. I opened my cracked phone again, praying for just a flicker of life. 2%. Enough. I didn't scroll. I didn't message. I opened the Notes app and typed, "Next year, I will not be outside this house. I will own it." The battery died in my hand. Outside, the snow had slowed, but the silence deepened. The windows of the house still glowed, but they no longer looked warm. They looked staged, fragile, like one gust of truth might shatter everything. I leaned back against the seat, my body trembling less from cold and more from decision. That's when headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Dim, slow, deliberate. A truck. Grandma's truck. She pulled up beside my car, engine idling. I didn't move. I didn't trust the hope forming in my chest. I thought maybe I was hallucinating. But then I saw the driver's side door swing open. The door slammed, and the next sound was boots crunching through snow. Then fists. Fists pounding on my window with an urgency that didn't ask for permission. "Caroline!" Her voice boomed through the storm. "Caroline Quinn, open this damn door before I break the window!" I scrambled up, fingers fumbling with the lock. The moment the door cracked open, she was already yanking it wider. Her face was red, not from cold, but from fury. "You get your behind out of this tin can right now," she said, voice shaking. "What the hell did they do to you?" I couldn't answer. My lips were too frozen to form words. She didn't wait for permission. She pulled me out like a sack of wet laundry, wrapped a wool blanket around me so tight I could barely breathe, and practically carried me into her truck. The heater was on full blast. It smelled like peppermint and old books. She slammed the door, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Those people are lucky I didn't bring a shovel." I let out the softest laugh, just enough to let her know I was still here. And as we pulled away from that house, tires crunching over snow-covered asphalt, she reached over, patted my knee, and said, "You're coming home with me." There was no hesitation in her hands, no doubt in her voice. Grandma had decided this story wasn't ending in that car. She held the envelope between her fingers like it was made of glass and handed it to me with a look that didn't need translating. In the quiet corner of her living room, just past midnight, I sat cross-legged under one of her heavy crocheted throws, my fingers still raw, my feet bundled in thick socks that didn't match. Outside, the snow had softened into flurries, but the chill inside my bones hadn't gone anywhere. The radiator hissed in protest, the kettle steamed faintly in the background, and the scent of Vicks lingered in the air like a protective shield. "Your father left this with the lawyer," she said, nodding toward the envelope. "He told me not to open it unless she turned into what she did." My chest tightened. I didn't ask who she meant by she. We both knew. I slid my thumb under the flap and opened it. Inside, folded neatly, were 4 things. The first, a copy of my father's original will, dated a few months before he passed. The second, a hand-signed letter addressed to me in his handwriting, the kind that slanted downward when he got tired. The third, a key, small, brass, taped to a yellow sticky note with the name of a local credit union written in block letters. The fourth, a photo of the 2 of us in front of our old house, just the 2 of us. I was maybe 10, holding a snow shovel like it was a trophy, grinning with 2 missing teeth. He had one arm around my shoulder. The other hand held a thermos. I stared at the picture for longer than I meant to. Then I looked at the will. "Is this real?" I asked quietly. Grandma sat down across from me, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "It's very real." According to the document, I was to receive the remainder of his personal estate, including a college fund, full ownership of the Subaru, and his 25% stake in Evan's Grill, the small restaurant he had helped fund with Darius before the man turned into a suit with teeth. None of it had been honored. "What happened?" I whispered, even though I already knew. "She didn't just ignore it," Grandma said, her voice sharper now. "She had it overwritten, quietly, with a new one that didn't include you, signed 2 weeks after the wedding. That man, Darius, told her you needed structure, and she let him sell your birthright like it was part of a garage sale." I leaned back on the couch. The living room felt suddenly smaller. "She said I needed to grow up," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. Grandma didn't smile. "They say that when they want you to give up, there's a difference." She stood and shuffled toward her desk, rummaging through a file cabinet before returning with a thin folder. "I started keeping things," she said, almost apologetically. "Old bank letters, investment reports, enough to notice when things started going missing." She handed it to me. Inside were photocopies of checks, withdrawal slips, and investment summaries. My name was on several of them. Transfers had started 6 months after Dad died. One in particular caught my eye. $18,457, transferred from the Caroline Quinn Education Fund into an entity named Evans Kane Holdings LLC. The name made my stomach turn. "You saw this and didn't say anything?" I asked, not accusingly, just stunned. "I asked your mother," she said. "She told me it was being restructured for tax efficiency." I didn't believe her, but I knew if I pushed too hard, they'd cut off even what little access I had left to you. I waited. I watched. I collected. The rage I'd been carrying started to simmer in a different direction. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was data. It was receipts. It was something I could use. I set the papers down and looked at her. "I want to fight back, but not like them. No screaming, no scenes, just facts, the truth." Her eyes narrowed, proud and fierce. "Now you're speaking your father's language. I exhaled slowly, then asked, "Can I use your laptop?" She nodded and motioned toward the dining table. I pulled the chair out and opened her ancient Dell, the kind that wheezed when it loaded Google. Still, it worked. I logged into my bank account, what I thought was left of it. Zero. Not just the college fund, my checking, my savings, my emergency fund. Everything gone. "That was money I earned," I said out loud, the words sharper than I intended. "I worked for that. Every shift, every tip, every burned finger." She didn't interrupt. I stared at the screen like it owed me something. "I asked her to say something," I murmured, my voice catching. Grandma's eyes softened. "When?" "Right before I left. I was in the kitchen, getting my coat. I said, 'Please don't let them do this. Please say something.' She looked at me, right in the eye, and said, 'Stop being dramatic. You'll survive.'" Grandma inhaled sharply, like she'd been punched in the stomach. "She said that?" I nodded. "And that's the last sentence I will ever accept from that woman." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she stood again and disappeared down the hall. When she returned, she carried another folder. Thicker, worn at the edges. She opened it slowly, reverently. "This is everything your father gave me before he passed," she said. "Instructions, names, contacts. He didn't trust Darius from the start. And he knew. He knew your mother was weak when it came to him." I pulled the papers toward me and began to read. Each line confirmed what I already felt in my gut. They hadn't just left me out. They had stolen, lied, and rewritten history in real time. And I had let them, not anymore. As I organized the papers into piles, Grandma placed a cup of tea beside me. No milk, just strong and hot. "I'm not going back there," I said. "You're not," she confirmed. I tapped the photo of me and Dad on the table, next to the folder. "I think I know how to start." She watched me for a beat, then reached into the folder and pulled out one last item, a sealed envelope. She handed it to me with both hands. "Then you're ready to see what your father really left you." The contents inside weren't just sentimental, they were strategic, and they changed everything. I laid them out carefully across Grandma's kitchen table, each piece of paper weighted down at the corners with salt shakers and mason jars. Her house was old, and so were the vents. Any breeze would have scattered it all. I wasn't about to let any truth get blown away. It was morning now. December 26th. The storm had slowed to a quiet snowfall. You could hear it whispering against the windows like a tired apology. I hadn't slept much. Maybe an hour or two, max. But my mind was alert. Clear in a way it hadn't been in years. The will was real. Notarized. Stamped. Signed in blue ink with my father's handwriting as distinct as ever. The document clearly stated that I was to receive his personal assets, what remained in his education fund, the Subaru, not exactly a fortune, but it was mine, and, this part hit hardest, his stake in the Evans Grill restaurant group, a 25% stake. That wasn't small. My breath caught when I saw the valuation. It had grown over the years, quietly, just like the way they'd buried me. Next to the will was the yellow sticky note with the credit union's name and the key still taped to it. I hadn't used that account in years. I thought it had been closed when Darius convinced Mom to streamline things. That word again. Streamline. The same one she'd used when she cleaned out my room, tossed Dad's records, and replaced everything with Pottery Barn neutrals. They hadn't forgotten me. They had edited me out, line by line, account by account. "I don't think they realized I'd still be here," I murmured. Grandma was sitting at the table across from me, one hand curled around a coffee mug, the other resting gently on her temple. "They hoped you wouldn't be," she said. "You were inconvenient to their story." I picked up one of the documents she'd saved, the ledger of transactions between the Evans Grill account and something called Evans Kane Holdings. The transfer amounts were too clean, too coordinated. It was laundering disguised as internal realignment. "Darius signed these," I said, showing her a copy. Grandma's eyes narrowed. "He's been calling himself a trustee for years. Your mother let him." "And she signed off on this?" I asked, though I didn't need to. Her signature was there in black ink. She let it happen, Grandma said softly. That's the part that always gets me. She didn't just sit back, she helped them build the machine. I looked at the last document, one I hadn't seen the night before. It was dated 3 weeks after their wedding. An updated will. My name was gone. Everything had been transferred into what they called the Isolde Family Trust, with Seraphine listed as the sole living beneficiary after both Darius and Isolde. I stared at it, feeling the familiar sting behind my ribs, like grief trying to find room inside a crowded chest. She gave it to her, I whispered. Grandma didn't speak. She didn't need to. I sat back, rubbed my temples, and stared at the stack of papers that now proved something I'd felt but never thought I'd be able to explain, much less fight. But this wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It was about reclamation. I stood up, stretched my back, and walked over to Grandma's landline. I'm calling legal aid, I said. She raised an eyebrow. It's the day after Christmas, and I bet I'm not the only one who's calling. The woman who answered sounded like she'd been working holidays for years. I gave her a summary, short and sharp. Family trust, overwritten will, financial abuse, forged consent. She asked for my name. I gave it. Caroline Quinn, I said. I have proof, and I'm ready to file. We scheduled a callback for the next day. I hung up, grabbed my notepad, and wrote down every place I needed to contact. Step 1. Get a certified copy of the original will from the attorney Dad had used. He'd passed away 2 years ago, but the office was still active. Step 2. Contact the credit union, confirm the account under my name, and request transaction history. Step 3. File an inquiry with the Minnesota Department of Commerce about Evans Kane Holdings and their business registration. Step 4. Request my college transcript. If they drained my education fund, I wanted to know where that money was supposed to go. By noon, I had 4 folders created on Grandma's kitchen counter, each labeled with a Post-it and a paperclip. She watched me in silence for a long while. Then she said, "You're calm." That scares me more than if you were screaming. I smiled, just slightly. Good, I said. Around 2, I bundled up and walked down the block to the small post office near her neighborhood. I needed envelopes, stamps, a money order. The woman at the counter looked surprised to see me organizing paperwork 2 days after Christmas, but she didn't ask questions. On the way back, I passed my old high school. The snow had covered the front steps in a smooth sheet, untouched, almost ceremonial. For a second, I remembered what it felt like to be 16 and hopeful, like the world still had space for someone like me. By dusk, I'd sent 3 letters, made 2 more calls, and emailed a lawyer someone at Legal Aid had referred me to. I wasn't waiting anymore. That evening, after dinner, I told Grandma I wanted to take a walk. The wind had stilled. The sky was that kind of deep gray you only get in winter, just enough light to make the snow glow. I found myself 2 blocks from where I used to live. I hadn't meant to go there, but my legs carried me on instinct. From across the street, I could see the lights inside. Seraphine was on the couch, wearing the flannel pajamas I used to wear every Christmas Eve. They still fit her. Maybe Mom had washed them and passed them on like a family heirloom. Something borrowed. Something stolen. I didn't get closer. I didn't need to. Through the window, I saw Isolde standing by the sink, pouring tea into one of the mugs I'd painted for her in middle school. The kind that said, "Best Mom Ever," in chipped red letters. No one looked toward the window. No one noticed. And this time, that didn't hurt me. It cleared me. I whispered something, not for them to hear, but for me. Enjoy it while it lasts. And then I walked away. The storm outside was finally over, but what was coming next would be louder, sharper, and completely unstoppable. By the 1st of January, the roads were clear. The world had resumed its rhythm. Storefronts in downtown Minneapolis were back to flashing sale signs, coffee shops reopened, and people had returned to work still slightly hungover on hope, and I was done being polite. That morning, I took Grandma's old printer offline and booted up her desktop. I plugged in my USB, stacked the folders I had color-coded the night before, and opened a blank document. The subject line was simple: Request for legal review. Caroline Quinn. I addressed the email to Dad's former attorney. I wasn't sure if he still handled estate matters, but I figured his inbox would still be monitored. I attached PDFs of my father's original will, copies of the altered version that excluded me, bank records showing the educational trust transfer, and a notarized statement from Grandma detailing the timeline of events. I didn't accuse. I laid out facts. I copied in the Minnesota Office of Legal Affairs, a nonprofit family financial abuse advocate, my university's financial aid department, and a friend of a friend who had once worked as a paralegal and now ran a legal awareness blog. Then I added one more line at the bottom. I'm not seeking revenge, I'm seeking restoration, and I have everything I need to start. I hovered over the send button. Then I clicked. There was no dramatic swell of music, no flash of adrenaline, just the quiet relief that comes with action. Later that afternoon, I filed a complaint with the Minnesota Bar Association regarding breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and financial abuse. It took 3 hours to fill out every form, scan every attachment, and write my statement, but I did it. No threats, no emotion, just documentation, I told myself. Grandma helped me double-check everything before I uploaded it. You sure you're ready for what comes next? She asked, not with fear, but with measured concern. I've been ready since they locked that door, I said. The next morning, the first ripple hit. Their lawyer replied to the forwarded email. We should speak, privately. That was the moment Darius panicked. From what I could piece together later through a string of mutual acquaintances, he stormed into the study, slammed his phone down, and accused Isolde of letting the girl stir up trouble. Isolde, predictably, blamed Seraphine for making everything public with that ridiculous photo. Seraphine rolled her eyes and said something like, "It's not my fault Caroline finally decided to grow a spine." None of them denied it. Not really. They were just mad it wasn't a secret anymore, and the timing couldn't have been better. The local women's civic group was hosting their annual New Year's charity brunch that Saturday, a semi-formal affair known more for gossip than giving, but well attended by the city's middle-class elite. Isolde was being honored for her service to women's empowerment. I heard about it through a flyer at the library. The moment I saw her name printed beneath the words, "Leadership and Family Values," something inside me clicked. I didn't ask permission. I ironed the one blazer I had left, twisted my hair into a low bun, and pinned on my mother's old brooch, the one Isolde used to wear before she decided it was too outdated. I tucked the folder under my arm, the one with every paper, every receipt, every truth. Grandma offered to drive, but I declined. This part, I needed to do alone. The brunch was held in a small community center near the river, the kind with faux crystal chandeliers and folding chairs dressed in white satin covers. Volunteers passed around coffee and lukewarm quiche. I walked in quietly and took a seat at the back. Isolde was radiant at the podium. Cream blouse, soft curls, that gentle, measured voice she used when she wanted people to believe she cared. Our daughters, she said, need examples of strength. They need to know that no matter the obstacles, women rise when they support one another. Family is where that begins. The room applauded. I stood. At first, no one noticed. Then a few heads turned. One woman whispered something, and suddenly the hush was spreading across the room like a wave pulling back from the shore before a crash. I stepped forward, steady, and approached the mic. "Funny," I said, loud and clear. "You locked yours in a car during a blizzard." Gasps. Audible, honest gasps. Isolde froze. I turned to the crowd. "My name is Caroline Quinn. I'm the daughter they don't talk about, the one who was erased from a family trust, whose father's will was rewritten, whose education fund was drained to fund their lifestyle." Darius had moved toward the side of the room, face pale, jaw tight. I held up the folder. "This," I said, flipping it open, "is the proof. You stole $50,000 that was legally mine. You lied, you manipulated, and you left me outside to freeze while you drank champagne." One of the event organizers rushed toward me, flustered, whispering something about decorum and "let's discuss this privately." I didn't shout, I didn't break. I handed the folder to the organizer and said, "Then read it, all of it, and then decide who deserves your applause." She asked me to leave, politely but firmly. Before I turned to go, a woman from the front row stood and said, "That was brave. It needed to be said." I nodded, then walked out. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. A journalist caught up with me before I got to the car. He didn't ask questions, just handed me his card and said, "If you ever want to talk." That evening, as the sun dipped below the edge of the city skyline, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I answered. A voice, a man's, low and unfamiliar, spoke. "Careful what you stir up. Families fall apart fast." Click. I stared at the screen for a second. Then I forwarded the number and message to my attorney with a note. Anonymous threat. Please document. No emotion. Just documentation. What they didn't realize was that I already had everything I needed to burn their paper-perfect world down. I thought that was the end. But healing has a longer memory than revenge. The day after I reclaimed my father's investment stake, Minneapolis felt sharper somehow. Not colder, the worst of the snow had come and gone, but cleaner, like something false had finally been scrubbed from the air. I'd spent the morning answering calls from legal offices, confirming receipt of the settlement agreement. The paper trail was real now, official. I had signed copies, court-sealed notices, and a release statement acknowledging the misconduct. It had taken weeks, but it happened. And yet, when I looked at myself in the mirror that afternoon, brushing my hair back behind my ears, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Just steady. Then the story broke. It was a Tuesday when the local news site published the article, front page, under a soft-hitting human interest banner. Holiday scandal. Young woman locked out by step-family in blizzard. The headline alone made me pause. But the article, it wasn't soft. It was truth. Raw and unpolished. There was the Christmas photo, caption and all, screenshots of the financial statements. A direct quote from my statement at the charity event. "You locked your daughter in a car during a snowstorm while you toasted yourselves." And Grandma's voice. They had interviewed her too. She had said simply, "You don't let your grandchild freeze unless you've already decided she doesn't matter." The article was shared over 12,000 times in 24 hours. I got emails from people I hadn't spoken to in years, old classmates, distant cousins, strangers. The messages piled up. Most were supportive, a few confused, some emotional. I was the Caroline in my house too. I didn't even realize financial abuse was a thing. That's not tough love, that's cruelty in a cashmere coat. But not one from my mother, not one from Darius, not even a blank text from Seraphine. That silence said more than any response could. By the end of the week, Darius's company had lost 3 contracts. 2 local businesses publicly withdrew their partnerships, citing ethical concerns. Isolde was quietly removed from her role on the civic board. Her scheduled speech at the annual Women's Equity Conference was canceled. The organizer had emailed me directly to say, "We stand with truth. Thank you for your courage." Seraphine deleted her Instagram account. All those curated brunches, the glittering gym selfies, the family-first captions, gone, poof, and still, nothing from any of them. Not an apology, not a denial, just vacuum. The only sound came from my own breath as I stood once again in front of the house where it all started. It was mid-January, crisp but dry. Grandma waited in her car parked on the corner, idling with the heater running. I walked up the driveway slowly, dressed in a navy wool coat Grandma had tailored for me when I was 17. My lawyer walked next to me, briefcase in hand, every step firm and intentional. Darius answered the door. He didn't look older, just smaller. His smile didn't even attempt to rise. "Caroline," he said, stepping aside. Inside, the house felt cold, not in temperature, but in spirit. The energy was off. Too quiet, too tidy, like someone had tried to scrub the memories off the walls but didn't quite succeed. Isolde stood near the fireplace. She didn't wear makeup. Her sweater sleeves were stretched at the wrist, like she'd been tugging on them. "We were just overwhelmed," she said. I turned to her, held her gaze. "You weren't overwhelmed. You were in control. That's what makes it worse. She blinked fast but said nothing else. I handed Darius the envelope. Legal notice, settlement acknowledgement, termination of their hold on any of my father's assets, a firm line drawn under all of it. This house is no longer yours to weaponize, I said. He didn't argue, just stared at the papers in his hand. We walked through the house one final time, not as daughter and father figure, not as family, just two legal entities resolving unfinished business. When I stepped into my old bedroom, I expected to feel something, nostalgia, sadness, even grief, but it was just empty, stripped of posters, rugs, and books. It had been converted into an office, then into a guest room. Now, it was just a blank shell. I touched the doorknob, the same one that once turned to lock me out, and I whispered, "This door closes both ways now." We left. Later that night, I sat on the edge of Grandma's couch, tea in hand, wrapped in a fleece blanket that smelled like lavender. Snow began to fall again, not a storm, not a warning, just flakes, soft, slow, and harmless, the kind that covered everything without a sound. I didn't look back. I had my keys, and I had my name. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't fighting to be heard. It's choosing what you do with the silence afterward. 2 months had passed since I walked away from the house with legal victory in one hand and my identity in the other. Late February now, the sidewalks in Slavic Village were still streaked with old salt lines, and the air had that sleepy Midwest hush, like winter wasn't over, but no one had the energy to argue with it anymore. The cafe opened quietly on a Thursday. We didn't make announcements, no ribbon cutting. No PR photos, just a hand-painted wooden sign above the door that read, "Red Wool." It was a tribute, of course, though not many people asked. The few who did got the short version. My dad had a red blanket. I always felt safe under it. That was enough. We kept it simple. 4 mismatched tables, a bookshelf filled with donated paperbacks, and a pay-what-you-can corkboard. Grandma brewed the coffee. I baked the scones. The rest took care of itself. By the second week, regulars started to appear. Mr. Hanley from the barber shop down the street came in every morning at 7:15 and read the same mystery novel in the corner booth. Nora, a widowed math teacher, brought in a tray of lemon bars once a week, just because. And then there were the kids, quiet, hoodie-wearing teens who came in after school, didn't always buy anything, but always left calmer than when they arrived. No one asked too many questions. Maybe that was the magic of Red Wool. We weren't there to fix anyone. Just to remind them they hadn't been forgotten. One afternoon, I was behind the counter restocking tea tins when a girl came in, early 20s, wearing glasses too big for her face and a coat 2 sizes too small. She ordered a chamomile and then hovered near the register, uncertain. "You're the girl from that article, right?" she asked softly. I didn't flinch. I got that question sometimes, not every day, but enough. I gave a small nod. She looked down at her drink, then back at me. "You were really brave." I smiled, not wide, not forced, just enough to acknowledge the moment. "No, I was just tired of pretending." That seemed to sit with her. She gave a tiny, grateful smile, then walked to the corner with her tea, slid into the window seat, and pulled out a spiral notebook. I returned to the sink, but her words lingered. Brave. I never felt brave. I felt broken, then angry, then quiet, but never brave. I didn't want to win, not in the way people thought. I didn't need applause or to prove them wrong. I just wanted to stop losing, to stop erasing myself so that other people could stay comfortable. Grandma always said the world prefers quiet women, but even she had to admit quiet never saved me. Later that evening, after we locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed, I walked to the back room, pulled open the old desk drawer, and took out the letter I'd written months ago, but never sent. The envelope was still sealed, yellowed slightly at the corners. The handwriting on the front just said, "Mom." It wasn't an angry letter, not even a confrontational one. There were no accusations, no lists of wrongs. It started simply, "You broke me." And it ended with, I had to become someone new just to hold myself upright. I never asked her why. I realized somewhere along the way that even if she answered, it wouldn't undo the damage. The need for an explanation had faded. The need for a witness had not. I slipped the envelope back into the drawer and locked it. Not to forget, but to finally stop waiting for her to say sorry. We had customers the next morning, more than expected. I didn't have time to think about letters or court documents or what Darius was doing in Florida or if Seraphine still worked that boutique job she hated. They weren't part of this new rhythm, this new room I had built. At noon, I brewed tea for Grandma. She was knitting by the front window, needles clicking softly, eyes tracking the slow drift of snow outside. "Almost lunchtime," I said, placing the cup beside her. She didn't answer immediately, just gave me a look, the kind that held pride without words. "You've made something here," she said finally. "Something good," I nodded. "I just wanted one warm room," I replied. And I had it. Later that evening, I flipped the sign again, from closed to open. The snow had returned, floating lazily under the glow of the streetlight. But it didn't feel threatening anymore. I stood by the front door for a moment, hand still on the knob, watching the flakes fall. The door was unlocked. The warmth behind me was real. I never got back the home I lost, but I built something else, something better, not for them, for me. And this time, I'm not outside. I'm holding the keys. Sometimes the people who should protect us the most are the very ones who tear us down. But healing isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice, your worth, and your place in the world. What would you do if your own family shut you out, not just from their home, but from the life you were meant to have? If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've been through, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories, just like this one.